Thank you, Sean. Welcome, everyone. Good evening, and welcome to this joint meeting of the Select Board and the Planning Board of September 27, 2022. On July 16, 2022, Governor Baker signed into law an act relative to extending certain state of emergency accommodations, which, among other things, extends the expiration of the provisions pertaining to the open meeting law to March 31, 2023. The act does not make any new changes to the open meeting law other than extending the expiration date of the temporary provisions regarding remote meetings, which this is, from July 15, 2022 to March 31, 2023. My name is Arthur Doyle, and I serve this year as the Milton Select Board Chair. I am joined by Chair Meredith Hall of the Planning Board, and we jointly welcome you to this meeting, very important meeting, whereby both the Select Board and the Planning Board have as its purpose this evening the appointing of 2 additional members to the Master Plan Implementation Committee in accordance with action taken at the May annual town meeting that increased the membership of the Master Plan Implementation Committee from 5 to 7 members. At this time, I call the meeting of the Select Board to order and invite its members to introduce themselves. May I begin with Mr. Zulus, our Vice Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mike Zulus, Vice Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Good evening. Richard Wells, Secretary.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Good evening, everyone. Erin Bradley, member.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Roxanne Musto, member.
Thank you all, and I now turn to Chair Meredith Hall to introduce herself and call her meeting to order.
Thank you. I would like to now call the meeting of September 27th for the joint meeting of the Select Board and the Planning Board to order. And I would now like to introduce the members of our board. Rich
Beeler, a member.
Cheryl
Tagayas, Secretary.
Maggie, you're muted.
Sorry, Maggie O'Phil, member.
And Sean
Fahey, member.
And Meredith Hall, serving as chair. And now I would also like to introduce our staff, the Planning Board Department. Tim.
Thank you, Meredith. Tim Zerwinski, Director of Planning and Community Development.
Josh
Lee, Assistant Town Planner.
and Julia.
Getman, clerk.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And at this time, I would also like to introduce Town Administrator Nicholas Milano, Town Council Kevin Freytag, and Executive Administrative Assistant Linda Napoli. In keeping with this evening's agenda, would you please join in the Pledge of Allegiance? I pledge allegiance
To the flag
of
of the United States of America
and to the
and to the
republic
republic
for which it
for which it
stands,
stands,
one nation,
one nation, under God,
indivisible,
indivisible,
with liberty
with
and
liberty and
and
justice.
justice for all. Thank you all very much. In the way of prefatory remarks, I would like to acknowledge the comments received from the public by members of both boards in advance of this evening's meeting, including the open letter to the members of each board by 98 of our citizens. All comments received are appreciated and will be attached to the minutes of this meeting so as to be part of the public record. In the last day, there were some requests for public comment this evening, even though not on the posted agenda. With an elapsed time of 4 months since town meeting and opportunities for public comment at both Select Board meetings and Planning Board meetings during recent months, the chairs are in agreement, and we hope you are understanding of this, that the meeting should go directly to the business at hand, focusing on that important work and accomplishing it through discussion by and the deliberations of the members of the two boards. We also wish to mention that any additional comments following this meeting are welcome to the next meetings of the Select Board and the Planning Board. Following discussions and deliberation, from which it is hoped a consensus will be reached between the two boards, the Select Board will take its vote, followed by a vote of the Planning Board. All votes will be by roll call. If the outcomes of the votes by both boards are in alignment, each board will then offer a motion and vote to adjourn its meeting. If the boards are not in alignment on both appointments, they will reconsider their nominees and repeat the process, going as long as it may take to complete the process of appointing the two additional members of the Master Plan Implementation Committee. Should both boards be aligned on one appointment, but not on the other, they may vote the aligned candidate and then return to the process for the second appointment. I now call upon Planning Board Chair Meredith Hall to read the names of the 10 candidates for the two additional positions to the Master Plan Implementation Committee, and to ask the first member of the Planning Board to make their nominations, after which a member of the Select Board will do the same, with nominations made by the two boards on an alternating manner. In order to create a short list to guide our deliberations, we are asking for up to 3 nominations from each member, after which we will review the tally and begin deliberations. Town Administrator Nicholas Milano has volunteered to manage a tally sheet to assist us in our work. Meredith, I turn it to you.
Thank you, Arthur. So I just would like to say we have some amazing candidates, and we are grateful for all of those who submitted applications. It's really, really quite wonderful, the great participation and just the quality of applicants. The applicants are as follows: Dimitri Petion, John Cohane, Glenn Pavlicek, Warren Lizio, Regina Campbell Malone, Rachel Peters Card, Dan Walsh, Jonathan Lashley, Demetrios or Jim Davis, and Deb Azarad Savona. And with that, I think we can just begin our discussion. And I would, if we could, I think if we could try to stay close to 3 minutes, just with our initial comments, just, so we'll have time for, plenty of time for follow-up discussion if needed. So as close to 3 minutes as possible, if we could all try to stay to that. And with that, I would be happy to go to our secretary, Cheryl Tagayas, to begin on behalf of the planning board, if she would like to start.
Thank you, Chair Hall and Chair Doyle. I am also the chair of the Master Plan Implementation Committee, and I am the planning board representative for that. But before I name the candidates and the recommendations of the Master Plan Implementation Committee, I do want to make a disclosure publicly. All of you have received a copy of one of the disclosures that I filed, the disclosure of appearance of conflict of interest, and a second, which I have not distributed. And I'll go through briefly what those two are. The first disclosure is relative to my being familiar and knowing Mr. Dimitri Petion. I know him. We were introduced by a mutual friend. Subsequently, my architectural office was engaged by Mr. Petion to provide architectural services for a project that he is doing in Boston. This appointment, though, will have no financial interest for me or for my company or for Mr. Petion. And I can be fair and impartial in reviewing his and all of the other applicants who have submitted their interest in serving on this committee. The second disclosure is that I also have personal knowledge and and through social networks, campaigns, and other initiatives in Milton. I know Mr. Glenn Pavlicek and Ms. Deborah Azarad Savona. And again, my experience with them in town will not impact me, and I can be fair and impartial in considering their applications along with the other applications that we have received. All right, so now having said that, the committee, as you will recall, is the one that made the request to enlarge its membership. And we did so actually when Mr. Doyle was the select board's representative to the Master Plan Implementation Committee. And in fact, it was he who brought it to my attention as chair that is something the committee might want to consider. And in that consideration, one of the main objectives that was suggested was that the committee broaden its diversity. We currently are 5 members. You have some stats that I prepared on behalf of the committee about the 5 existing members, Roxanne being one also. The select board's representative, she just joined a few months ago. Her seat, as I said, was filled by Mr. Doyle before that, and before him, Katie Conlon. The other members, 2 of the other members have been on the committee as long as I have, which is since its formation. So we're quite familiar with the work and task of the committee, knowing that we have additional work to do before the 10-year sunset of the committee. And so it was with this knowledge and interest of the amount of work left and the interest in diversity that the committee made the request to add 2 seats. So in our discussion, in the committee's discussion, we talked about what does increasing diversity mean? And we talked about, well, that could be in diversity in age, it could be in gender, it could be in socioeconomic status, it could be geographic location of where one lives in town, and it could be how long one has lived in town. All of these could provide diversity. And so we looked at how the current membership, where they live by precinct, and we looked at where the new applicants live by precinct. And we took what we could from our personal knowledge and from the information in the applications to understand the interest in diversity. And so we put forth at least two of the 3 candidates all provide at least geographic diversity, if not other diversity. 2 provide racial diversity. And the other thing I would say is that it was a difficult decision. There were 10 good applicants, and there was variety in discussion. We asked each member of the committee to provide 3 names, if they would, of people that they thought would be good candidates. But also what we considered was the charge of the committee also having a requirement of having someone who is either an architect, a landscape architect, a planner, or someone in real estate or economic development or a relevant field. And we weren't sure how relevant field might be defined. For us, it was important that somebody had community engagement, involvement in their community, could reach out to their community, and that would broaden the input and diversity of voices that we would hear on the committee. And with that in mind, the 3 candidates that the committee submitted to you are Regina Campbell-Malone, Dan Walsh, and Dimitri Petion.
Thank you, Cheryl.
That concludes my comments.
And would you like to now have your
Yes,
independent
thank you,
or
Meredith. I appreciate that, and would like to call on our Vice Chair, Mr. Zulus.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I think Ms. Hall was going to ask Cheryl if she wanted to follow up, if I may.
I'm sorry, I missed that.
Yes, that's okay. I just was going to say, Cheryl, I'm
By all
assuming
means, go to
that
it.
you are that would be your 3 that you would like to put forth as an individual.
Yeah, just so you know, as an individual at the Master Plan Committee meeting, the 2 that I put forward were Regina Campbell-Malone, for the reasons that I just mentioned, and Jonathan Lashley, the architect, who has a lot of planning and urban planning experience, which I thought particularly important for the work of the committee. In the discussion of at the Master Plan Implementation Committee meeting, we came to a consensus on the 3, and Jonathan Lashley dropped out, but I'm happy to put forth those 2 as the ones that I put forth to our committee. Thank you.
Thank you, Cheryl.
There's a hand raised from Mr.
Yeah.
Bill. Richard?
I'm sorry, can you repeat those 3? Sorry about that. I think I had a hiccup in my volume.
Sure. The 3 from the Master Plan Implementation Committee: Dan Walsh, Regina Campbell Malone, and Dimitri Petion. The 2 that I said were Regina Campbell Malone and Jonathan Lashley.
Thank you. Sorry about that.
Thank you. And thank you, Richard. Mike, we turn to you now, and thank you for picking me up on that. I appreciate it. I've been like Richard, going in and out with the reception here.
No
So,
worries.
I turn to you.
No worries, Arthur, and thank you, and welcome to our planning board friends. I'm going to briefly, in the interest of time, address some but not all of the candidates, but that in no way diminishes my respect for their backgrounds and for their willingness to participate in the community. And I hope, to the extent that people do not become members of the MPIC, that they'll choose other ways to become involved in the community and other committees to join in the community. First, Jim Davis and I are friends. We have been for several years, and our families are friends. I too filed a disclosure form because Jim and I have been friends for many years. I have the highest regard for Jim. I think he's a man of integrity and character. He's a good father, and he's a good son, and he's a good husband, and he's a good friend. Jim and I often disagree on political issues, but we agree, and our disagreements are far outweighed by what we agree on in terms of what it means to be a good citizen, a good resident, and a good friend. So I do have that disclosure on Jim Davis. Second, I didn't know John Kahane prior to this, but he reached out to me, and we had coffee. And Mr. Kahane, from what he told me, wants to participate and wants to help his community, and he has a good background in construction. And he comes also with the recommendations of people with the East Milton Neighborhood Association, with whom I hold in the highest regard, including Andy D'Amato and Mike Mahalchuk and Joe O'Neill. And so I had that interaction with Mr. Kahane. I do know Glenn Pavlicek, but we don't know him that well, and I don't know Deb Savona from being involved in activities in town. But those don't, in my view, rise to the level of a disclosure form because it isn't to the level that my friendship with Jim Davis is. So, having said all that, I do recognize and I appreciate that the needs and the goals here are to add diversity and for the MPIC to gain assistance in areas that could be helpful to it. And so based on that, my 2 choices, and I'm making 2 choices rather than 3, because my hope is that we can eliminate a few cycles and move along here as quickly as possible. So I'm only going to choose 2, and hopefully that will help us move along. I think Regina Campbell Malone can add great value because of her geographic diversity, because of the racial diversity, because of what she can bring in terms of community engagement, and because of her expertise in education. And so I think Regina Campbell Malone would be an excellent choice to join the Master Plan Implementation Committee. Second, I take the recommendation of the Master Plan Implementation Committee that they would like additional expertise in historic neighborhoods and development of historic neighborhoods. And Mr. Walsh has very good experience in that area. And so he would be my second choice. So my two choices, and I hope it doesn't hurt their efforts here, but my two choices are Regina Campbell Malone, who adds, again, that kind of geographic and racial diversity. Dan Walsh, who also adds geographic diversity and an expertise that I think would be helpful to the MPIC. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Zulus. Any questions for Mr. Zulus? Chair Hall, will you turn to you for your next member, please?
I'll turn to, would Sean Fahey like to speak next?
Sure, I'd be happy to. Thank you, Chair Hall, and thank you, Chair Doyle. I do have one question before I provide my comments. I think we all received an email from resident Swenson addressing questions in regard to the subject matter that Cheryl spoke about earlier. And as a planning board member who's being asked to participate and vote, I would like to know if we could have some guidance from Town Council Freitag as to a response from our Town Council with respect that I believe that email is only about 2 hours old.
Town Council is with us. Kevin, can you join us, please? And let's make sure that he received that.
Good evening, Mr. Chair.
Good evening, Mr. Freitag. Welcome. Did you get a chance to hear Mr. Fahey's question?
I did. I would say that I've been sort of caught up in some other matters this afternoon and just had a chance to review some emails on my ride home tonight. But I think that the issue is that there is an issue that's been raised regarding a particular candidate. It's my understanding now that the disclosure form that was filed by Cheryl Tagayas has in fact been filed. Everyone's aware of that. And so I think that the board is now in a position, the board's in a position to act however they would choose to tonight. Everyone is aware of all of the information. And I think that they can take that in their best judgment and make a decision tonight as they see fit.
Thank you, Mr. Freitag. Does that help, Mr. Fahey?
It does, Chair Doyle. I just wanted to make sure as Town Council that we have no risk or exposure. And if we have no risk or exposure, I'm prepared to proceed.
Mr. Fahey, Mr. Gias has raised her hand. Would you be willing to allow her to comment, or would you want her to comment after you?
No.
Thank you, Cheryl. You're recognized.
Thank you, Chair Doyle. Perhaps Mr. Fahey would be interested. I did contact the ethics office at the Attorney General's office and was advised to file the disclosures. I asked if there was anything further I needed to do, and the advice to me was no.
Thank you, Mr. Gias. Mr. Fahey, floor is yours, sir.
Hey, thank you, Chair Doyle, and on legal matters, I appreciate anything that Cheryl would offer, but I follow Kevin Freitag for legal matters, so he has said we're safe to proceed. I'll proceed. With respect to my comments, I am referring in regard to my thought process with selecting members to two pieces of documentation that, as I believe, we're obligated to follow. And one is the initial article that created the MPIC back in 2014. And that would be Article 13. And in Article 13, it refers to criteria after it mentions that the planning board and the select board would appoint a designee. What it reads is the other members shall have expertise in planning, architecture, economic development, landscape architecture, real estate, or other relevant fields. Subsequent to that, we have the article most recently passed, which is, I believe it's Article 17. And again, it simply reads, this is Article 17, to see if the town will vote to increase the size of the Master Plan Implementation Committee from 5 to 7 members and to act on anything relating hereto. So within the comments, it reads, given the amount of work that remains, 2 additional members would allow the Master Plan Implementation Committee to take a deeper dive into the 6 sections of the master plan, check in with the departments and boards responsible for implementation, and be able to deliver a comprehensive report to the town. That being said, if we're adding 2 members to the Master Plan Implementation Committee, in my judgment, my responsibility as a member of the planning board is to follow the qualifications that are provided to us in Article 13 from 2014 and in Article 17 from 2022. Based on those qualifications, and I feel it's my duty as a planning board member to follow what town meeting passed and not any other interpretation of that, I am strictly following the language as written into the articles. And while I deeply appreciate the volunteerism of 10 people that made themselves candidates by providing applications, half of the group have qualifications that align with what was passed in town meeting back in 2014. So I do have 3, Chair Doyle, that I would propose, and all 3 that I am proposing have qualifications that meet the expectation of the article. And again, I'll reiterate, that is the only qualification that I'm assessing my proposed recommendations for. One is Jonathan Lashley, 15 years of experience in the architectural field. Another is John Cohane, 40 years of experience in the construction field. And my third is Dan Walsh, 30 years of experience within the real estate field. All 3 of those applicants, in my judgment, meet the qualifications as outlined in the articles, which we are striving to fulfill. Those are all my comments, Chair Doyle.
Thank you, Mr. Fahey. At this time, may I turn to Select Board Secretary Richard Wells. Mr. Wells, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you for your efforts on this. And again, not to belabor the point, thank you to everyone who applies. As you know, Mr. Chair, appointing people to committee is what we do. It's the people's business. We appoint people to, and I believe Member Musto referred to regally, we have 94 committees we've made appointments on, and that's what we do. In this case, as far as disclosure, given that I'm approaching my 39th year of service to the town, I probably have to file disclosure on nearly everyone in this community at some point because of relationships I've had in so many different roles. But in this case, I really only knew one person, and I may know the others, some of them, but I've really only had a professional relationship with one of them, and most of the others I only know by what I've read, or perhaps I may have met them. So I kind of made this decision on looking at their resumes, looking at the mission of the Master Plan Implementation Committee, and understanding the work that they've done since they were created back in 2014. As you know, on the Select Board Landing Committee, we would not even be here, and the advances that we are about to make down there would never have existed without the MPIC. And so I'm very grateful to all the work they've done. Given that, looking at the mission, I'm prepared to nominate 3 people as well. And the first one that I wish to nominate is John Colhane. And John came to me, as Mike Zulus had mentioned, for full disclosure, I now live in East Milton. I've moved back here to Granite Place, where I grew up from 8 to 18. And John and many people, including Mike Mahalchek, and many had come to me on John's behalf, and I actually met and listened to him. He does have the construction background. He does have an interest in this community. And the one thing that he did say to me is that he wanted to get things done. As you know, and anyone who's served with me now and has served with me in the past knows, if there's one thing I want to do on this board, time is utility, is get things done. So that is my first nomination. My second nomination is Dr. Glenn Pavlicek. And I nominate Glenn because he didn't have to do this. I was actually surprised when I saw his name. Glenn Pavlicek, to me in these days, is in the same breath as people like John Cronin and Marvin Gould. He's served as a town meeting member. He was chair of the warrant committee. He served on the school committee and as chair of the school committee, and then the final 6 years came to assist his own community as the assistant superintendent of business. He currently has weighed in invaluably on the school building project, and he knows every inch of this community. And while he may not be an architect or construction person, the one thing I've learned in my decades with this community is there is indescribable value to the historic and operational knowledge of what goes on in this town and the community and the neighborhoods that we live. So he is my second one. And my third one I picked is Dimitri Pition. I know nothing about this man. I only know from his application and really from Mr. Gaius's disclosure, which made me look at him a little bit further, is that 2 things. He's a man of color, 3 things actually. He's a man of color. He's a man who was in the business and has a history in the business. And the third thing is he lives in precinct 1, which, as you know, Mr. Chair, is so underrepresented in so many aspects of this community. It only makes sense. So those are my 3 recommendations: Glenn Pavlicek, John Colhane, and Dimitri Pition. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Mr. Wells. Chair Hall.
Thank you, Chair Doyle. I would now like to call on Rich Bueller.
Yes, thank you.
Like to speak.
Okay. All right. I was taking my notes too. I don't know anybody on the list personally. I've spent 6 years on the warrant committee. Now my 5th year on the planning board. So I've obviously have worked alongside Glenn Pavlicek and think very highly of him. I don't actually know any of the others on the list, but this has been a long process. I have seen all the applications. We've talked a lot about different folks. We've gotten a lot of emails from residents. I'm putting forward 2 names. I'm not going to go too much into detail. It's very much in what I've heard from other folks. But my 2 recommendations would be John Colhane and Dimitri Pition.
Thank you, Rich.
Thank you, Rich.
Thank you.
At this time, Ms. Bradley, you are recognized.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chair, and thank you everyone for being here this evening. I've been on the warrant committee for 5 years, so I know some of these people. I know Glenn because he used to come and present to us, as I'm sure you all know. He was the assistant superintendent of the schools. I know Regina because she ran an amazing campaign alongside a lot of other really strong women in the town of Milton. And I know Deb Azarad Savoya because she designed my logos for my campaign. I didn't put in any disclosures because I haven't talked to any of them about this, so I didn't think I needed to, because we all just kind of know each other, don't we? So that was where I was coming from on that one. As you know, Mr. Chair, I like to call a spade, so I'm going to start calling some spades. I really appreciate the letter that was sent to us from the 98 community members and their eloquent way of putting into words about where we want to take Milton. And I really hope that those that are watching this evening have the opportunity to look at that letter because it will be part of this evening's minutes. As you know, Mr. Chair, I said at one of my meetings that I was at with you, that I think that having a criteria is that is exclusionary is not one that we should bring into what is going to be the next generation of Milton. The other spade is there's 10 of us sitting here and all of us are white. There is not one person of color on any of these committees. And I am the only person that is an out gay person. I'm the only minority that had to fight for any rights here on these committees joined together. So my decisions this evening will be to make sure that we're representing those of us that live in our town that are not reflected in the faces you see on your wall today as everybody's watching this, because there's a lot of people watching this. So I'm going to put forth 3 people. I looked at their qualifications. I mainly looked at their precincts of where they were from. I feel like we need to make sure that we rise up every precinct within our wonderful town and make sure that all those voices are being heard. So this evening, I'm going to nominate Regina Campbell Malone. I'm going to nominate Dimitri Petian. I'm really sorry if I said that incorrectly. And I'm going to nominate Jonathan Lashley. His qualifications were outstanding. So thank you, Mr. Chair. I appreciate this opportunity.
Thank you very much, Ms. Bradley. Chair Hall.
Yes, and Maggie, please.
Hi. So I just want to thank all the residents again for submitting their applications. We have been looking at everyone's applications since July, so I'm happy to see that this is coming to a closure. I know that we can't go wrong with whoever ends up on this committee, and it'll be exciting to work with some new voices. I'll put forth 3 names, and I believe that their professional qualifications do differ slightly from our current committee members, and they actually represent different precincts from our current committee members. I believe that their neighborhoods are really the neighborhoods that will be most impacted in the coming years, especially with zoning. Elliott Street, as you know, with the MBTA zoning coming up, I think needs a voice at the table. And so with his background in real estate and financial services, I nominate Dan Walsh. I also nominate John Cohane. He lives in East Milton. And as you know, we just issued an RFP for East Milton Square. He has been a contractor, but currently he is also an energy auditor. And both the planning board and the select board have been fortunate enough to hear recently from our town staff about their commitment to renewables and sustainability in town. I also will put Demetrius Davis in. I know he is a contractor. He's also has been a business owner in the past. I know he has kids in Milton Public Schools, and I think he would add a great voice and perspective. So thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Oldfield. And at this time, I'd like to recognize Ms. Musto. Roxanne, you have the floor.
Thank you, Chair Doyle. I first wanted to say that I wanted to thank all of the candidates that put their names forward for these 2 positions. It's a hard thing to put your name forward and on the line when it comes to something where there are 2 positions available and you have that many candidates. So I do want to thank each and every one of the people that put their names forward. They all offer something a little different. I would like to talk about 3 in particular, because I know that we were asked to come up with 3 different names. So I am recommending 3 different people for different reasons. And I do want to say that I look at what town meeting did vote for, because those are our peers. Those are residents, Milton residents and our peers that are at town meeting that vote on the articles. So their criteria is very important when we're looking at the qualifications of people. The first person I have is John Cohane. I liked the fact that he's a licensed residential contractor, and I feel like we need a contractor on the committee. I like the fact that he has the background in energy code and a degree in architectural engineering. So I felt that all of those qualifications would be very helpful. The second person is Dan Walsh from Precinct 2. On Elliott Street, and where we're talking about the potential for MBTA zoning, that is very important factor. I liked the fact of his background as well. And some of the things that he put on his application, I would just like to read a quote or two. That his background is in real estate planning and sales, as well as financial services. He's frequently asked for input on new developments in historic areas, requiring sensitivity to existing neighborhood, blending the old and new together. And he would like to see positive, well-planned, attractive housing and business development. And I thought that was very important. The third person that I'd like to mention is Dimitri Petion. Well, first of all, I want to say that I know him a little bit because he had a son that's the same age as my son. They went to elementary school together, and I served on a few committees with him at different points. I think he is a good character. However, I wasn't really sure that he had a lot of development experience. I always remembered him doing more with like the Health Connector and health-related technology. And I wish he had put more things on his resume to give me more information about his development experience. Nevertheless, I do want to put his name forward as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Bastow. Ms. Hall.
Great, thank you, Chair Doyle. As I looked at this, these candidates, which are really come with some really incredible backgrounds. I tried to focus on really what is our planning board and what is the master plan implementation. As Richard Wells says, in getting things done, the two biggest things that we're looking at that we've already done in RFP, we're looking at is the East Milton overlay zoning. So that is one of the most significant things. And then also the MBTA, zoning for the MBTA. So I was looking to really for well-qualified candidates who would meet the needs. And so I am actually going to put forth two people also. I would also, Dan Walsh, also, again, extensive real estate planning and sales experience for the past 30 years, as well as financial services background with 15 plus years with Fidelity Investments, so economic development. Most recently managed a team of 100 real estate professionals in the Back Bay and South End of Boston, and frequently, again, asked for input on new developments in historic areas requiring sensitivity to existing neighborhood, blending old and new together. I liked his positive attitude, saying, I'm hoping to have a positive impact on adhering to the approved plan for my neighborhood. So I think it's going to be very critical to have good communication with residents who literally live, right on the trolley and along that MBTA line. The other thing about Dan is that he represents what I would say is sort of an unrepresented precinct. So he is represents precinct 2, which I think it would be really good to have a voice that would represent the needs and the concerns, particularly as we look at the MBTA zoning. So I thought that would be a really important piece of the Master Plan Implementation Committee's work. The second one is, again, because the East Milton neighborhood, the overlay zoning is going to be overlay zoning for the largest business district in our town. This is, it is critical, I think, to have the best communication possible. And there'll be many open forums. We will want voices from all parts of Milton, obviously, but really having the greatest impact on our town, the greatest representation. So John Cohane, I believe, as a leader in the Milton Neighborhood Association, would be able to reach a large number of people and voices. And again, we need to hear from all voices in East Milton, but I think John would really do a great job in outreach. And he does have an architectural engineering degree, which is one of our criteria. He's been a licensed residential construction contractor from the early 1980s up until 2010. And he is now a HERS rater responsible for assisting builders to comply with the Mass Stretch Energy Code. So looking at our sustainability work, I think he could bring a voice, an important voice to that. So therefore I would put John Cohane forward, Dan Walsh. And I do have to I have to say, Warren Lizio, I also has a very impressive resume. I was sort of torn between Jim Davis and Warren. So I only decided to put 2 forward, but I just want to say thank you to all the qualified folks, and please keep your names on the list for future openings.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I have 3 candidates that I will nominate. I want to give you a couple of comments as to why I put those names forward. One is the experience of 2 years of service on the Master Plan Implementation Committee. Another is the recognition that the MPIC's 10-year charge expires in 2024, as was mentioned earlier, with a pending decision as to the updating of the master plan. This is a task more vital now, in my estimation, than even the creation or establishment of the master plan itself, even though that cannot be underestimated. We're in a new era, a very complex and increasingly demanding time. A focus on vision and progress that ensures sustainability. The imperative of economic development. And this applies to Chapter 41, Section 81D of the Massachusetts General Laws, which call for a master plan economic development supplement, which identifies policies and strategies for the expansion or stabilization of the local economic base and the promotion of employment opportunities. Next, diversified experience. And finally, a recognition of skills and experience, transferability, and synthesization, so that no candidate is pegged necessarily only in what his or her career or avocation might be, but how the accumulation of their experience can be transferred to what it is that Milton will be faced in the future. So my nominees are Dan Walsh, Dimitri Petillon, and John Cohane. Thank you. At this time,
Mr. Chair, just a point of order. I didn't hear your first vote.
My first vote was Dan Walsh. Okay. Thank you, Mr. Wells.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
At this point, if it's agreeable, Madam Chair, we might turn to our town administrator, Nicholas Milano, and see what our tally looks like, and then get an idea of where we go in our discussion, and hopefully arriving at a consensus prior to vote. Mr. Milano, can we recognize you, please?
Sure. I can either share my screen quickly, or I can just read what I have for a tally, whichever you prefer.
Why don't you share it? That might, the visualization might be helpful to some.
Okay.
Thank you for offering that.
So I hope that's not too small for you folks, but I did put it in order based on the count. Mr. Cohane, Walsh, Petillon, then Campbell, Malone, Lashley, and then Davis and Pavlicek is what I tallied up based on your commentary.
The chair, Mr. Milano.
Yes.
I can't see your totals, but if I'm correct, Mr. Walsh and Mr. Cohen each counted 7 votes. Am I correct on that?
I have 7 for Cohen and 6 for Walsh.
And how many for Petrioff, for Dimitri?
5.
Okay. Mr. Chair,
Mr. Wells, you recognized?
I make a motion based on the results of the tally by the town administrator that we appoint John Cohen and Dan Walsh to the Master Plan Implementation Committee.
Thank you, Mr. Wells. Is there a second to Mr. Wells' motion? Mr. Giles, you recognized?
Mr. Chair, I was going to request that we have further discussion before going to a motion and vote.
I agree, and I thought that that would be procedurally what would next follow. But
I think we got
Mr. Wells, without a second, if you would entertain discussion?
I thought I heard a second, Mr. Chair.
No.
Chair Doyle, I will second.
Yeah, I'll second.
Okay, it has been moved and seconded,
second it.
and the floor is open for discussion. So
That's fine,
Mr.
Mr.
Giles, you
Chair.
have
Thank
the floor, and then Mr. Zulus.
Yeah, so this is a question of process, Arthur. I had understood that from your email that we were going to go separately as boards and come up with rather than do cumulative voting and do cumulative voting only in the absence of a consensus of the 2 separate boards. So it's quite a different process if we're just going to now vote. And if that's the process, I will add a 3rd nominee to my, but I understood that the process was going to be, we'll all suggest our applicants, and then each board will see each board will decide who their 2 who their 2 nominees are, and we'll see if we have a consensus. If we don't, then we'll go a different way. So maybe I misunderstood, but if you could,
No, I'd be happy to clarify that. That's a good point. Mr. Wells' nomination would pertain only to the select board.
That's the motion I made, Mr. Chair, specifically to our board.
Yeah.
I apologize. Hold
Fahey
on.
second that. How can Sean
Sorry,
Fahey
he did.
Let me go to Ms. Musto. She was recognized first, and then we'll go to Cheryl. We can work this out.
My understanding was the way that we did it was the way that we were supposed to do it today. And that's a democratic process with everybody having their individual votes.
That's also not in the email that I received about how the process would work. I got the same email I think that Mr. Zulus did explaining the process. And I anticipated that there would be discussion after people made their initial nominations. I would implore, again, I've been chair of the Master Plan Implementation Committee since its inception. That's coming on 7 years. This is an important decision. There's been a lot of interest in this in town, as witnessed by people who have contacted the boards and otherwise. And, you know, there's a lot of interest in your board, in the select board, in increasing diversity in participation in our boards and committees. And I think we need to go to the process that was outlined to us in the email. And then I would also like to have a discussion about whether we think that it would be wise to nominate 2 white men to fill these positions and how that is meeting the needs of a diversity and achieving diversity in our committees. Thank you.
Good, thank you. I want to point out something that the 2 boards have to vote as boards individually. I didn't catch this, but I have to backtrack it. The second to Mr. Wells was made by a planning board member, not a select board member.
I don't think so, Mr. Chair. He did, but I believe Roxanne Musto seconded it first before he, that's what I heard.
I'm sorry,
I did
okay.
afterwards.
Roxanne, you seconded?
Yeah.
Okay, so we have discussion. Ms. Bradley?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. I appreciate that. So when we look back at the tape, we can see that Sean actually seconded you, Mr. Wells, and then Roxanne came right in afterwards. But you know,
That
We're
is,
not there.
Erin, that is absolutely true. I didn't understand the process. I thought we were, I
Okay.
certainly wasn't trying to deviate from rules.
Totally fine. I just want to make sure that everybody knew that. And Sean, thank you for saying that, because I'm like, I'm not going crazy over here. I know what I heard. So,
Right.
Mr. Chair, I have to agree with not only Vice Chair Zulus, but Planning Board Member Tagayas. I had a completely different interpretation of your email that you sent out. In fact, so much so that I contacted our town administrator today to confirm how this would happen. I have an email from him regarding the last time that we went about nominating somebody for the master and the MPIC. And it was done as two separate boards.
Correct.
And then we came together. So I would like to say two things. One, the fact that we have just nominated two white men is astonishing to me. It takes nothing into consideration that our town members actually said at the last town meeting. And all of you should go back and read that, because all of them wanted diversity on this committee, and that's why we got 2 extra seats. So that's appalling to begin with. And second of all, I would like to ask that Mr. Wells retract his motion, because we need to vote as a separate select board, and the planning board needs to vote as a separate planning board, and then we can come together.
That is correct.
Thank you.
That is the way the process was outlined to work. Ms. Musto, you're recognized.
I'm just going to take my hand down for a minute.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
So I just have a question too. Sorry.
Ms. Oldfield.
Sorry, Mr. Doyle. So if we were going to do this separately, why did we need to come together tonight in one joint meeting? So as I mentioned, the planning board has had this on our agenda since July. And even tonight, I'm disappointed we didn't meet in person. I know tonight was really not a great night for me, but I actually changed it around because I thought it was really important to meet in person. So I'm just, I guess I don't understand what the need was for us to meet tonight if we were going to vote separately.
We agreed, if I remember, that while both boards would be voting on the 2 additional candidates, that we would have a conjoint meeting for that purpose. And during the meeting, we would have an opportunity for discussion, deliberation, and hopefully the arrival at a common or a mutual approach to the final votes by each board.
So I do understand that, but I sort of thought maybe the planning board would have taken our own vote and kind of come up with our 2 names. And then you guys would have taken your vote and come up with your 2 names. And then at that point, we would have a joint meeting with maybe these 4 names. And then we could discuss these final 4 and then come up with an agreement. So I do appreciate coming together. And I do think it's important. We discussed at our board, working together, but it just seems like getting 10 people on board is way more difficult than just getting 5 people on board. And we're making this a very drawn out process unnecessarily. Thanks.
Thank you for your comments. And we did attempt, for the record, to have this meeting in person. That was the desired priority, but for multiple reasons, it wasn't possible. Mr. Wells, you're recognized, and Ms. Tagayas, and then Ms. Bradley. Mr. Wells.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Let the record reflect, before Mr. Fahey did second, I stopped you because you said I didn't have a second, and I heard a female voice second, and I believe, if it wasn't Aaron, I believe it was Roxanne, it was after that I protested that Sean Fahey then said, and you're correct, he cannot, this is Historically, in my 6 years, we've done this once. Mr. Zulus was with me, was the only other member who was here when we did this, and that was we appointed a park commissioner, and the two boards met, the Board of Park Commissioners and the Select Board met jointly in public, and in that case, we actually, it was a much smaller list. We actually interviewed, I think we had 4, we interviewed in person, the 4 finalists, and then we voted in the same manner. Secondly, to Ms. Bradley's comments about astonishing, I agree, which is why I voted for Mr. Petion, was one of my votes. I believe that he brings both the experience, work in the area of the Mattapan lines, Mattapan Square, that Milton Mattapan section of town, the background, and the fact that he represents Precinct 1 as a person of color, I thought was a smart choice. Thirdly, to Ms. Bradley's request that I withdraw my motion, I'll ask this. I mean, we vote, we tally, and according to what to Mr. Milano, I was keeping it here. The 2 people were Mr. Cohen and Mr. Walsh. If someone's, with Mr. Petion being third, if someone's wants to change their vote or re-vote on this, I think, as I said earlier, time is utility here. If that's the case, then I'll gladly withdraw the motion. But to me, Mr. Chair, we voted. I made the motion and was seconded for the purpose of discussion. That's my only added to this, is if someone wants to change their vote from the 2 votes, the 2 final votes that we have, I will then withdraw the motion. If not, and I say this sadly, because Erin is correct. Unfortunately, it's a democratic process. We're the elected boards, and we voted, and I made the motion based on what the outcome is. As I said earlier, I don't even know Mr. Walsh, never even seen him, and Mr. Cohen, I only know very vaguely because of his expressed interest in this.
Thank you, Mr. Wells, and that is the point. It's a matter of discussion.
Mr. Chair, could I speak for a moment, Mr. Chair?
I have recognized
The list.
Ms. Tajayas, Ms. Bradley, the hands up ahead of you, Sean, were Richard Baylor, Michael Zulus, and then you in that order, if I may.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just want to, I guess maybe I had a misunderstanding of how this tally was going to work. And some of us only nominated 2 and some nominated 3. And so that really changes the way the tally is taken. So if I may, I would like to suggest that you offer to those who only offered 2 names to add a 3rd. And then the other thing that I would like to mention is in the Master Plan Implementation Committee dialogue that we had, and discussing how important we felt it was to add racial diversity, we submitted 3 names. In part, 2 names would meet the goal of racial diversity. And one of the things that we were concerned about was what the definition of relevant experience is. And we've had no discussion of relevant experience here tonight. I've heard that some people say that construction is a relevant experience, construction experience, but that is not something which is listed in the list. So if one wanted to consider it relevant, we should talk about that in conjunction with other relevant experience. Let's not forget that a big part of our master plan talks or addresses municipal facilities, including the schools. And so having someone with some experience and knowledge about that, I think, is something important. And the plan is not a construction roadmap. It's a planning document. It's, so relevant experience in community engagement is actually something more relevant than construction, because you're not actually building something, you're seeking community input on a plan. And so I really think that we haven't talked about what really relevant experience means. In order to have a master plan that, let's just say we want to know, has the master plan been implemented? If we speak to some people, they might say it has been. If we speak to others in their neighborhood, they might say we haven't received any attention in this master plan. And so that might be something that's not architecture, that's not construction, that's not engineering and economic development. That's where the discussion of relevant experience comes in. And so I would really hope that we would have some discussion on that topic. And if we're not going to, then I would like to add, I mentioned Regina Campbell Malone and Jonathan Lashley. I would like to add Dimitri Petion. I would like to see a person of color as one of these two nominees. Thank you.
So if I read you correctly, Mr. Gias, you have previously nominated 2 candidates and you are adding a third?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay. So would you give us your 3 candidates again, please?
Yes, Regina Campbell Malone, Dimitri Petion, and Jonathan Lashley.
Thank you, Mr. Gias. Ms. Bradley, Mr. Bela, Mr. Zulus, and then Mr. Fahey.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chair. So I'm going to still go back to where we were, which is the email that you sent out and the procedure that was going to happen this evening. And while I really want all of this discussion to happen and discussion around the MPIC and what the qualifications are, because FYI, last time I checked, none of them are doing zoning. That's what the planning board does. None of them have any zoning issues. And it's really interesting to me that there are multiple people that have been nominated that represent one area of our town that continues to have the most laser focused vision of our town officials. There is a whole nother part of our town where our people need the same equitable things that is happening in East Milton to happen on our side of town. We need it to happen in precinct 4. We need it to happen in precinct 1. We need some representation from our side of the woods on this master plan. Because right now, nobody's talking about this side of town. And I have to tell you that the constituents that I talk to are up in arms that we don't have any type of responsible commercial development happening over here. I have to drive 20 minutes just to get to a grocery store. Not y'all in East Milton, you can just go right down to the fruit center. So, we've got a lot of things to discuss here. But first, I would like some clarification before we go one step further on what the rules are for this evening. Because the email that was sent out and the procedure that I confirmed with our town manager earlier today about how this has happened in the past is not the procedure that we are following this evening. So if that means that Mr. Freitag needs to be brought in, if that means that we need to go back and everybody read that email, which by the way, Mr. Chair, you sent a wonderful email with Chair Hall to all of us on this committee. And I'm sorry that folks didn't get it or read it or comprehend it, but it was really clearly laid out of how this was going to go. So I appreciate that. And I just want us to go back and recognize what our positions are this evening. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And let me go then to this. We will not lose that. Mr. Bailey, you're recognized.
I think Mr. Zulus was before me. He's on the list ahead of me, but it's up to you.
If he was ahead of you, then Mr. Zulus has the floor. Thank you.
Thank you, Rich. More than courteous of you. 2 points. One, to follow on Aaron's process question. Richard is correct. Previously, when we appointed a park commissioner, we had a cumulative vote of the 2 boards to determine who the next park commissioner would be. However, that I thought worked well. However, as Aaron points out, that is not the process that was laid out by the chairs. The process that was laid out by the chairs, and I didn't see any question of it or disagreement, maybe there was, but I didn't see it, was each board would come up with their own nominees so that effectively there would be 2 votes rather than 10 votes. That's the process, that's where we were. So that's where I think we are in process. And then given the fact that we're talking about cumulative votes here and recognizing that we do need diversity from different parts of town. We do need diversity from different groups in town. I'm still going to have 2 votes because I'm hoping to move this along, but I'm going to move one of my votes from Mr. Walsh to Mr. Petillon. So now my 2 votes, because they're both in precinct 1, and we need representation from precinct 1. So my 2 votes are still Regina Campbell Malone, because I think she'd be an outstanding addition and would bring a lot to the Master Plan Implementation Committee that is not currently there and will not be there if she's not on it. And 2, Mr. Petillon, because he's in precinct 1 and he provides both experience in real estate development and prior experience working for the town. So that's where I went. That's where I am. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
You're very welcome, Mr. Zulus. And I do want to point out that the tally sheet was only intended to be a roadmap, not the decision. It was to be for us to use as a tool in the discussion that is taking place at this point in time. Mr. Baylor.
Yes, thank you. So for me, it's getting a little confusing. One of the first question I would ask is perhaps we could keep the tally up because there are votes changing. I'll be honest with you, I missed a couple votes from folks because there was a lot of commentary. So it would just be good to know where we're standing while we're talking. Secondly, I was in the same camp as Ms. Bradley and others that have mentioned. I thought I knew which way we were doing this. So I'm not saying I'm opposed to someone changing that tonight, but I would say that we should probably folks should reconfirm who they're voting for, and we go through that process to make sure folks understand what process we're taking and then confirm who they're voting for. We're going to go at like a cumulative process. If we're going to, and quite honestly, maybe that'll be quicker in the long run. But obviously I'm open to hear what the group has to say. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. And the intent again was to have each member identify up to 3 candidates. And once that was done, each of the board, following discussion and deliberation, would nominate their 2, vote. The vote may fail, and they may have to go back to another 2 as part of the democratic process. And then the planning board would do the same. Did I hear a request to see what the tally sheet looks like at this point?
Sorry, I threw up my hand again just because I didn't hear that part, but yes.
So thank you. Nick, could you put that up, please?
1 second here.
Mr. Chair, a point of order before we look at the tally.
Yes, Mr. Wells.
No disrespect to my friend, Mr. Gaius, but she has 4 votes. Her initial vote was Regina Campbell Malone, Dan Walsh, and Dimitri Petillon. And now she's added John Lashley, which would be 4 votes.
Mr. Wells, I think what, if I may, what Mr. Gias did was to state Mr. Walsh as one of the votes of the Master Plan Implementation Committee, not one of her votes.
I believe Chair Hall asked her specifically. I've been keeping copious notes here. Chair Hall asked her specifically, are those your 3 votes? And she replied yes. And Chair Hall can tell me if I'm wrong.
Yes, I don't think she mentioned actually Dan Walsh on one of her final 3.
Okay, so
Yeah,
I think it was Jonathan Lashley, I think.
Yeah, if I may, I thought they were not voting at that time. I think I was the first to speak, and I gave the view of the Master Plan Implementation Committee. And that committee, as you all know, because you received the readout memo, had Dimitri Petillon, Regina Campbell Malone, and Dan Walsh. What I said was that I went into that committee meeting with different names. And then tonight I gave 2. And then I asked Mr. Chair if I can come back and amend and have that be 3 since we're doing this tally, because I didn't realize when I gave those that we were actually doing a tally and that some people are calling a vote. So I confirmed that it would be my three would be Jonathan Lashley, Regina Campbell Malone, and Dimitri Petion.
Thank you. That's my recognition as well. Mr. Fahey, before we go to you, a previous speaker had asked to see the tally sheet as it stands at the present time. May we have that from Mr. Milano?
Mr. Chair, can you ask Nick to sort these in order of the count?
Could you repeat that, please, Ms. Oldfield?
Nope.
Oh,
No,
that was Aaron.
it's
Sorry.
Aaron.
Sorry, Aaron.
But you know, I might sound like Maggie.
No, I'm breaking up on this end, but doing my
Nick, we're
best.
all good. Nick did it. We're good. I just wanted him to change the sorting so that the count was, so we went by the count.
Thank you.
Yep.
Mr. Chair?
I've recognized Mr. Fahey.
Okay, go ahead.
Okay, Nick, could you bring this down and we'll go to Mr. Fahey and we can bring it back up again if we need it. Mr. Fahey, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I think as most of the members of both boards know, I'm new to my role and certainly new to this process. If we were to follow what was written in the email, the select board would have selected Mr. Cohane and I believe Mr. Walsh. The planning board would have selected Mr. Cohane and Mr. Petion. So if we were following the process, both boards would have been in agreement with respect to Mr. Cohane, and we would have then moved to discuss the two others that we were not in agreement on, which would be Mr. Walsh and Mr. Petion. So that's how I understood how it was written. My second point, if I could, is that where some members provide 2 names and other members provide 3 names, there's a lack of uniformity in terms of this process. And my third point is, as someone who's brand new to the process, it appears that we voted, we weren't, and I'm saying we, as the entire group here, 5 members of each board, we were not satisfied with the result. And now it appears that we're changing votes to try to get to the result that we're looking for. That doesn't seem right to me.
Yeah, let me just go back to the first point. There was a motion made and seconded, but there was no vote. So the select board has not voted on any candidates at this particular point in time. And this is an open discussion where people have an opportunity to exchange information and ideas and indeed add to or change their votes. And if somebody chose only to vote 2 people, that's their choice out of the 3. If somebody chose to vote 3, that's their prerogative as well. And we work with the results of their contributions to the meeting and to the discussion. I hope that's helpful. Mr. Zulus, you recognized?
I think Richard was before me. Arthur.
I thought he passed the baton to you.
No, I'm waiting, Mr. Chair, so I'm ready whenever.
Okay.
Mr. Chair, I'm prepared to, based on, I believe now, given the tally, I'm prepared to amend my emotion. Yeah, I want to amend my emotion. Amend my motion and nominate John Cohane and Dimitri Petion, based on the tally.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Wells. So noted. Mr. Zulus, Mr. Vela, and then Ms. Bradley. Is there
Yep. No.
Is the second to Mr. Wells' motion? He wanted to amend his motion.
No, because I'm still confused about what the process is and we have not discussed
Okay,
that.
let's leave that where it is then now and go.
Then I remove my prior motion still stands then, Mr. Chair.
Okay. Mr. Beal?
Oh, well.
No, you're up. Go for it.
Mike?
So, all right. So do we have a motion on the floor?
Yes, my
okay.
initial
Well,
motion stands.
I'm asking, Richard, I'm asking the chair.
Okay,
Do we have
sorry.
a motion on the floor, Mr. Chair?
There's a motion from the select board, on the select board side, that has been seconded by Ms. Musto. What Mr. Wells did a moment ago was asked to amend his motion. And Mr. Wells, do you want to repeat the amendation to your motion, please?
So based on Mr. Zulis's prior comments, I would amend my motion to appoint John Cohane and Dimitri Petion to the MPIC. This is for a select board vote that's for our board, not for the total.
Okay. And the question next is, will the original seconder of his motion go along with the amendation to that motion that she seconded?
Mr. Chair?
Yes, Ms. Musto, you're recognized.
Thank you. Are we going to, before we do that though, are we going to first listen to what the other people with their hands up have to say? Or are we going to first do this and then go from there? I'm a little confused on this process right now. It's getting confusing.
Rich Balaam?
Yes. Yeah, no, I think I'm clear now in Mr. Wells in his motion. I think I was still a little unclear on the process, but if I'm hearing you right, Mr. Chair, you haven't wavered from your email, and that what we really were doing, since the beginning of the meeting was putting forth our recommendations. And now it sounds like Mr. Wells is putting forward a vote for the select board. Is that correct? Okay.
That is correct.
On the same page now.
And that was what was outlined.
Excellent. I'm on the same page. Thank you.
Right. Ms. Bradley?
Oh, well.
I'm sorry, Mr. Your hand is in your ceiling, Mike.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah,
sorry about that.
They're almost the same color.
Sorry about that. So we have a motion made, I guess, and seconded. Roxanne accepted the.
I'll accept it, sure.
Okay, so we have a motion for Cohane and Petion. Let me ask Mr. Wells if he'd accept a friendly amendment to move forward with respect to Mr. Petion, and then have a further discussion on the second. On
John Cohane?
On any other second one. Do we? My request for the friendly amendment is to move forward with Mr. Petion and then have a further discussion on our second person.
No, I don't.
Might be the smarter way.
If I may, Richard, the idea is to try to reach some consensus. My guess is we can get some.
Well, that's what I just tried to do. That's what I'm trying to do here.
If I may, I think we can get some consensus on Mr. Petion, and then we can see if we can find consensus on a second name.
And I think Mr. Zulus is referring to one part of the memo that said a board could come to consensus on one member and then go back again for further discussion, but it all depends upon whether or not Mr. Wells is willing to accept what Mr. Zulus has put forward. And then, of course, that would have to be seconded or accepted by Mr. Wells' second if he chooses to do so.
I just don't know. I don't get the point of that. But so if we do that, Michael, you're prepared, if I accept that, you want to vote on Petion right now?
Correct.
Okay. All right. I'll accept that.
I'm hopeful we can get a consensus on Mr. Petion, and then we can go back and talk about a second name. That's my thought, Richard.
I second that.
Well,
Can't second it. You can't second this. You can't. I know what I'm doing here, Aaron. I know what I'm doing. Okay, I'll accept that.
Okay, and it's been seconded by Ms. Bradley. So
no,
we have a motion on the table from the select board side to appoint Mr. Petillon. It's been seconded by Ms. Bradley, and now it is open for discussion by the members of the select board.
I don't think so, Mr. Chair. I believe Roxanne accepted
Yes.
it has to be the same, it has to be the two of us.
That's right. Thank
Yeah.
you. So Roxanne, we go back to you.
I think she already said yes. So I don't put words in her mouth.
So you want to put Dimitri forward, but Mr. Cohen, who had clearly all of the votes.
I know.
Where I find that troubling. I do find that troubling. I don't know that I could second that at this point.
If I may.
I'd rather discuss everybody than if you're going to do that. I find that troubling.
Mr. Zulus, then Mr. Fahey, then
Yeah,
Ms. Bradley.
it's totally fair, Roxanne. While again, in this tally of both boards, Mr. Cohen did well, and he may well do well on the select board side. I think Mr. Petillon would get unanimity by the select board, where I'm not sure that Mr. Cohen from the tally would have that. So I was trying to segregate the issues so we could kind of attack them separately. And it's totally fair if you want to just take them both at once, but I just thought we could get one taken care of and then move on to the second. But
So one might get 3 and 2, and another one might get 4 and 1.
that's right.
Mr. Chair, now that I
Mr.
think about that, I
Mr.
don't think
Wells.
I can accept that, because I'm thinking back to, Kevin can weigh on this. I think it's the totality of the votes. Even though we vote as 2 boards, I do think it's the totality of the votes. And Kevin, you can weigh in if I'm wrong on this.
We'll go to town council, but my recollection, Mr. Wells, is that each board is accountable for appointing the members to the master plan implementation committee. We just happen to be doing that jointly.
But I still
Mr.
believe it's
Freytag.
okay.
Mr. Freytag, you are recognized.
Mr. Chair, if I could ask you to just to repeat the question, I want to make sure I understand what I'm being asked.
Mr. Wells?
So my question, Kevin, is, and I'm more referring historically to the one other time we did this, which was with the park commissioners and us, our board. Even though we're voting separately, that it's the totality of the votes between both boards that achieves the number for appointment. Am I correct?
I guess I'm unclear what you mean by totality. I think that
In other words, there's 10 people voting, 10 people voting,
Yes.
5 and 5. The person nominate, I mean, it doesn't have to be, but basically my motion right now is based on the totality of the votes between the joint boards. Even though it will require a vote from each board, that's how I'm doing it, which is similar to how we did it when we voted to appoint a park commissioner about 4 years ago.
Well, look, I think that there's a lot of different ways that this could be done. My understanding is that both boards need to vote independently on who they are going to appoint. So sooner or later, each board has to take a position on who it would like to appoint and then take a vote on that appointment. Whether that happens with 2 candidates at the same time or 1 candidate at a time, both boards eventually have to do that together and agree on both of those 2
Thank you. I got
candidates.
it. So based on that, Mr. Chair, I don't think I'd accept it. I get where Mike's going, but I'm going to stick by the motion I just re-amended with Mr. Cohen and Mr. Petillon.
Okay. And Ms. Musto, you retain your second of that motion?
Yes.
Thank you, Ms. Musto. So at this time, there is further discussion by the select board on Mr. Wells' motion as seconded by Ms. Musto. Seeing none.
No, my
and-
hand's up. No,
I'm
no,
so-
no. No, my hand's up.
You are right, Aaron.
Thanks.
Thank you.
That's why I turned my video off so you can see my hand, Mr. Chair.
And
So a few points here. First of all, the last time that the select board and the planning board got together to appoint people was not for the parks position. It was January 26, 2022. And that's when the committee appointments happened in such a way where the select board put forth their candidates and the select board voted on those candidates and the planning board put forth their candidates. The total tally that we are looking at right now involves input from the planning board. If Mr. Milano would like to separate that so that we only have select board votes on one tally and planning board votes on another tally, that would be fine. If folks don't believe that that was the last time we got together, the time before that was July 28th, 2021, when it came to reappointments of the MPIC. This is how the process has happened, exactly how you outlined it, Mr. Chair. The cumulative vote doesn't matter. That's all yippee skippy. Great that we all voted that way. But we are two separate boards and two boards need to put things out there. So if we look back at how the select board voted individually, I believe that we're going to have a different tally than what Mr. Wells is putting forth right now.
Okay, well, you would like to see the tally from the select board before any vote?
Only the select board. Only the select.
Mr. Milano, is it possible that you can do that? And we'll give you some time if you need it.
Just a minute here, sorry.
Okay, well, Mr. Milano is doing that. Mr. Zulus, your hand is up. So you are recognized. And then Mr. Wells, back to you.
Mr. Chair, I'll wait for the substantive discussion of the motion.
Thank you. In the meantime, Sean, your hand is up. Did you intend it to be up at this time?
I did, Mr. Chair. My point was exactly the one that Aaron made. If we are following the guideline of voting as two separate boards, we do need Mr. Milano to separate the tally so it represents independent voting of both boards.
Thank you, Mr. Fahey.
Mr. Chair, I think I'm waiting. I don't know.
Um,
I'll wait till you get to me, Mr. Chair.
Okay. Does everybody see this clearly now that Mr. Milano has put up? And could you rank order again, going back to Aaron's earlier question, Nick?
Yes, 1 second.
Thank you. Okay, Mr. Wells, you're recognized.
So, Mr. Chair, I could do this, but I'm trying, I know Mr. Zulus asked to move one vote. I don't want to do that because I want to stick by my motion.
And you're entitled to do that, Mr. Wells.
Because if I would move my vote, I would be inclined to move my vote from Dr. Pavlicek to Mr. Walsh, but I'm not going to do that because I want to stick by the motion that I've made.
Okay. So thank you. Mr. Milano, if you could bring down the screen, please. So we have a motion on the floor from Mr. Wells. It is recommendation that the appointees be the two following people, Dimitri Petrion and John Cohane. Is that correct, Mr. Wells?
That's correct, Mr. Chair.
And that is seconded by Ms. Musto. So we are in discussion, which I hope we're going to close pretty soon. Mr. Zulus.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Given that we are focusing so much on this tally, I am constrained now to add a third, and I will add that to Mr. Walsh. And that shows the point that our board, at least in the tally, which is non-binding, our board is unanimous with respect to Mr. Petion and could easily move forward on him. And the other two, the next two, are tied. It's equal. So it seems to me that, and I'll ask again, I'll ask to make the friendly amendment that we move forward on Mr. Petion and then have a discussion about Mr. Walsh and Mr. Kahane. And if not, I'll intend to vote against the motion with the hope that it would be defeated and we can move forward with Mr. Petion and then have a discussion with respect to Mr. Walsh and Mr. Kahane.
I hear you, but I can't accept that. Mr. Chair, I'd ask that you move the vote.
There's no further discussion, so we will vote on the motion by Mr. Wells, seconded by Ms. Musto. Ms. Musto, you asked to be recognized?
Yes, I do have a quick question, which is, can we send 3 names forward or only 2 for the planning board's consideration? We're voting on the 2, and I second what Mr. Wells said. I'm just asking a question.
I'm not sure.
Mr. Chair, my motion is for appointment. It's not for consideration. My motion is for appointment.
Okay,
I
I
believe
will
that's
second that.
Roxanne's second.
I'll second that.
Okay, so it has been moved and seconded. Any further discussion? Roll call vote. Mr. Zulus?
So I will vote no with the hope that we can move forward after that with Mr. Petion and then have a discussion with respect to Mr. Walsh and Mr. Kahane, who have the same number of votes according to the tally.
Mr. Wells?
I vote yes.
Ms. Bradley?
I vote no, and I concur with Vice Chair Zulus, who eloquently said that I would hope that we can get Mr. Petion voted in after this vote, and then have a discussion about Mr. Walsh and Mr. Cohane and what precincts they represent.
Ms. Musto?
I vote yes with Mr. Wells.
And the chair is going to vote no on this one, but entertain or offer that a select board member might entertain another motion at this time. Mr. Zulus, you are recognized, then Mr. Wells.
I'll make a motion to, Mr. Chair, motion to appoint Mr. Petion.
Is there a second, please? It has been seconded. Discussion. Mr. Wells, you're recognized.
I just don't think this is the right way to do this, Mr. Chair. It's just not correct. And I don't want to vote no, because if I vote no here, I'm going to make a different motion. And my goal all along had been to meet all the goals that have been that I've talked about and other members have talked about here tonight.
And we may get there yet, Mr. Wells, and in the event that it may be helpful, the procedures for the meeting did allow for such a vote to take place, recognizing that we would go back again. So that it's in the protocols for today's meeting to do exactly what the motion is that's on the table. I hope that's helpful to you. So it's been moved by Mr. Zulus, seconded by Ms. Bradley. Roll call vote. Mr. Zulus.
Yes.
Mr. Wells.
I'm going to vote yes, but this is not right.
Thank you, Mr. Wells. Ms. Bradley.
Yes.
Ms. Musto.
I'll say yes, but I'm with Mr. Wells. This is not the right way to do it, and I don't agree with it. I don't agree with this process right now.
And Mr. Doyle, yes. So the select board has voted one appointment of the 2 to the Master Plan Implementation Committee.
Mr. Chair.
Mr. Wells, you're
I renew my past motion to appoint John Cohane to the Master Plan Implementation Committee.
Thank you, Mr. Wells. Is there a second to Mr. Wells' motion?
I will second that.
Thank you, Ms. Musto. It has been moved and seconded. The floor is open for discussion. Mr. Zulus, you are recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Kahane, as I mentioned in my opening, becomes very highly recommended from people whom I hold in high regard. From speaking with him, I think he wants to do this for the right reasons. He wants to participate. He wants to help. He even mentioned to me that if he weren't appointed, that there's a possibility of volunteering, and he might want to do that. So I think he's doing this for the right reasons. However, we have a representative from Precinct 7. We do not have a representative from Precinct 2, and as has been pointed out, with the MBTA Communities Act, Precinct 2 is going to be disproportionately affected by that. And so given the fact that we don't have a representative from Precinct 2, given the fact that Precinct 2 will be disproportionately affected by the MBTA Communities Act, and it's important to have that, and also given the fact that the Master Plan Implementation Committee has identified the importance of historic neighborhoods in their work, and that is a gap that they are trying to fill. My hope is that we move forward with Mr. Walsh, given his background experience, given what the area that he represents. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Zulus. Ms. Bradley, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So one of the things that many of our committees have been talking about, including the planning board, is this MBTA overlay. And as I look at the MPIC, there is not one person represented from Precinct 2, which this overlay directly impacts. There is no voice from Precinct 2 on the MPIC. There is nobody that can represent that entire precinct. When we go to talk about taking multiple homes and needing to build a giant apartment place or a not giant apartment place in 3-family homes, we have no idea what this MBTA layover is going to do to Precinct 2. And so for us to actually vote to not have somebody from Precinct 2 on the MPIC is a degradation of duty, in my opinion, for what's coming down the line for this precinct. These people are going to have to give up their land. They're going to have to possibly eminent domain. Who knows what's going to happen? No. You don't know that. You don't know that. And if you go and look at what the next administration is here to do, you have no idea. Now, may I be exaggerating? Of course, we all exaggerate. We all push it to how we want. Nobody's talking about eminent domain. Nobody's talking about any of that stuff right now. So everybody take a deep breath. But wouldn't everybody in Precinct 2 like to have somebody on the MPIC that can represent them? I cannot support Mr. Cohane, although I'm sure he's qualified. He has not reached out to me. It's great that he reached out to all the guys. He didn't reach out to me. I don't know anything about him. I couldn't pick him out of a lineup, but then again, I couldn't pick Dan Walsh out of a lineup. So I really think at this point, we need to think about the entire structure of the MPIC and what that means to our entire town, and not just the interests of certain folks, so that we make sure that every precinct that is impacted by the decisions of the state have a voice on when Milton moves next. So I see Tim's hand up. I know he's going to yell at me for saying eminent domain. So just know, Tim, I didn't really mean it. But I just want to say I cannot vote for Mr. Cohane, knowing that there's another person on the committee that's from the same precinct as him, and we have no representation of Precinct 2. Thank you.
You mentioned Mr. Zawinski. We let us hear from him and then go to Mr. Wells.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I would never yell at my boss in a public meeting, so no worries about that. But I just want to reiterate Erin's comment. Zoning doesn't involve eminent domain. We're not talking about that at all. And to the extent that either MPIC or the select board or the planning board or any board or committee in town is involved in the drafting of MBTA community zoning, we're not even really there yet. So I think that the goal of geographic diversity is the right one. I think this is the way that you all should be talking about membership on the MPIC. But just from a kind of procedural, kind of operational standpoint, we haven't really come to a consensus about our approach to drafting MBTA community zoning. So to the extent that MPIC is going to be involved in that process, they can certainly be involved, but we haven't had those discussions yet. And so I think that, it's something that is going to be an all hands on deck approach. And so I think that, the idea of having someone from that precinct on the MPIC makes sense. But MBTA communities is kind of being inserted into the MPIC conversation in a way that really hasn't been fleshed out yet. So I just wanted to kind of add that point of clarification.
Thank you. Mr. Wells, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. To be point, I'm not panicking about the MBTA communities, and to Tim's point, he's correct that MBTA communities is pretty far off before it actually happens. I don't believe people can just come in and buy up homes. It will be like any other developer in this community that's sold land. It'll be similar to that. The planning board knows that from the projects that they see. The sunset on the MPIC is 2024. That's 18 months away, not even 18 months away. As you know, Mr. Chair, I lived in Precinct 9 for 22 years before I moved here back here 5 years ago. East Milton Square is facing the biggest change of anyone. You know it, I know it. Anyone from East Milton who's living it, the members of the planning board know it. As a matter of fact, if I'm correct, to Chair Tagayas and to the meetings I've attended, from the time you finished the new PUD in Milton Village, East Milton Square has been the focus since. And given that, and this is a 2-year window, and I'm not disagreeing with Aaron, if 2 years from now, this board or the joint boards decide to extend the sunset of the MPIC, and it's the MBTA Communities Act, then I agree with that. But I was the first select board member elected from East Milton in 45 years. Arthur's the second in 45 years. Don't ever think East Milton is overrepresented, because it wasn't. But they do vote and they do pay attention. And the issues that are pressing before them right now, to include close to 400 housing units, definitely warranted my vote for Mr. Cohane. So it is for that reason that I don't intend to change it. So thank you for allowing me to comment on that.
Thank you, Mr. Wells. We have 2 hands up. Cheryl, did you want to make a point of clarification?
Yes, I did. On the ongoing work in East Milton Square, that's being undertaken now by the planning board. And the master plan implementation committee has recognized that there's been a lot of planning attention both by committees, by the department, and by funding in Milton Village and East Milton Square. And so it is in the interest of the committee to make sure that the other aspects of the plan are followed through and get attention. And so I just wanted to make that clarification.
Thank you. And Mr. Zawinski, did you wish to make a clarification? Your hand is recognized.
I'm sorry, I just got to lower my hand. I was an artifact, sorry.
Ms. Bradley and then Mr. Zulus.
I think Mr. Zulus was first, but I'm going to be really quick. I just want to say that currently on the MPIC, there is a representative from Precinct 6 and there's a representative from Precinct 7. So right now, Precinct 6 and 7 is currently represented on the MPIC. There is nobody from Precinct 2 that is represented. That's all I would like to say.
Thank you. Mrs. Zulus.
Just to reinforce that, the facts laid out by Ms. Tagayas and the facts of the representation currently in the MPIC, and the fact that we don't have a Precinct 2 representation augur in favor of I think Mr. Walsh, who would give that kind of representation. There's been nothing that's been said that to really dispute that notion and those facts.
Thank you. Any further comment? I would just like to weigh in on one thought, if I may, and that is that while we're recognizing the precincts from which people come, having served on the Master Plan Implementation Committee, its members have the town as a whole as their consideration. And let us not forget that once an appointee joins that board, they have a whole different scale and scope of responsibility. It is the totality of Milton. Mr. Wells, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. You took the words right out of my mouth. There are 10 precincts in this community, and we couldn't put someone from all 10 precincts. But just as for each of us on both of these boards, our role is to represent the entire community. My vote for Mr. Cohen, as I stated, is based on what is pressing in East Milton now. I care just as much about precinct 1, 2, 3, all of them. I've seen good and bad in each and every one of them, and understand them probably better than most. But this is where we're at right now. And I mean, I didn't vote by precinct. I'm voting by what are the pressing issues. And as no one knows better than Cheryl. I mean, we brought in Judy Barrett. We've had traffic mitigation, the traffic commission. Everyone has been weighing in on issues in East Milton in the past 2 years. And those are the pressing, and Tim, you know this better than as well, that some of the most pressing issues right now are in East Milton. And it's a 2024 sunset. And as I said previously, if this board, whoever the board is in 2024, whether I'm here or not, decide to extend it, then I agree. So thank you for that.
You're welcome, Mr. Wells. I think we're ready for a vote. And again, it will be by roll call. And Mr. Wells, your hand is up.
No, I'm sorry. I thought I put it down. Sorry, Mr. Chair.
So we have the motion. It has been accepted. The motion is the appointment of Mr. Cohen. And it has been seconded by Ms. Musto. Roll call vote. Mr. Zulus.
So, Mr. Chair, regretfully, I will vote no because as I said, I think Mr. Cohen is doing it for the right reasons, and he becomes highly recommended. But given the representation that we already have on the committee and the need for precinct 2, I'll vote no with the hope that we can add someone from precinct 2. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Mrs. Zulus. Mr. Wells.
Yes.
Ms. Bradley.
Mr. Chair, thank you. I vote no for the same reasons that Mr. Vice Chair just stated.
Thank you, Ms. Bradley. Ms. Musto.
I vote yes. I would also say that to reiterate that when you're on a committee or you're in office, you represent everybody and you look for to help everybody in the community. So anybody who's on this committee, the expectation I would have is that you are looking out for everybody and not just your little neck of the woods. So, and I really wish we could put, another person on there. So I will stick with my original vote with Mr. Cohen and with Mr. Wells's motion. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Musto. And for the reasons that I addressed when I made my nominations in the notion of transferability, I too will vote for Mr. Cohen. So thank you, one and all, for your deliberation and your work. It's not supposed to be easy, but the select board is at its point of 2 appointments to the Master Plan Implementation Committee, and Chair Hall, I now turn the meeting to you.
Thank you very much, Chair Doyle. Could we actually share the screen? Again, I'm sorry to ask you to do this, but if we could see how the planning board, how their votes laid out. So running similar top 3. Okay. Wonderful. Thank you. And I look to the board. Yes, Cheryl and then Maggie.
Cheryl, you're on mute.
Sorry about that. Meredith, would you entertain a motion for nominating one member at this time doing the same fashion as the select board, or would you prefer to do both at the same time?
I would defer to the board. Maggie, did you have a question on the similar lines? Was you can ask?
No, I just was wondering if Nick could put the spreadsheet back up.
Okay, great. Looks like Sean wanted to do that.
Because it's incorrect who the names I put forth under my.
And mine too, also, sorry.
I think when they sorted them, they got out of whack.
Yeah, that's what it looks like has happened. Let me flip back. Give me 1 second. I have it on a different tab. And rather than mess with the sorting, I will leave this up here for you folks.
Okay.
No, that sorting got wrong too. I'm sorry.
That's okay.
Give me 1 second. Excel issues. Give me a moment and I will get
Thank
it
you,
back
Nick.
up to you folks.
You're doing a great job. And we can repeat if you would like our selections, if that's helpful.
And I just also have just another question about kind of the process of this whole thing, because I'm wondering if all the town residents, fully understand that everyone could apply. Because to Sean's point, the way that I read this, and I re-listened to town meeting when we voted. And again, to Tim's point about the word shall, that shall is a must. So in the Article 13, where we were established a master plan implementation committee, it said the other members shall have experience. So what Tim always has told us, and again, I'm new, so I'm sorry if am I getting this incorrect? I thought shall is a must. And so my question is, if it's a must, then they should have those experiences. But my other bigger concern is, did town council ever get back to MPIC? Because I thought Cheryl raised the question at the MPIC meeting if town council wanted to weigh in on what other relevant fields meant. So my question is, we did have an applicant early on in the process. She applied really early, one of the first ones. And then she withdrew her application because she said she didn't have relevant fields. I mean, she didn't have the experience. The quoted shall have experience. So she withdrew her papers. So I'm kind of wondering if other residents in town didn't put forth their papers because they thought that they didn't have experience, the stated experience that town meeting voted on, both. Yeah, twice, we voted on twice, in 2014 and then again in 2022. So I kind of would hate to have other residents feel like that they, were misinformed because they thought that they needed to have these qualifications.
That applicant, Maggie, actually did resubmit and asked to be reviewed.
Okay.
Even though she we thought she had withdrawn, but then wanted to be considered.
Can I add a comment, Meredith, relative to what Maggie said about the relevant experience? I don't know if Tim or someone else could put the actual language up on the screen. I would point out, as I did earlier, that construction and sustainability and HERS rater, the 30 years of experience that Mr. Cohane has is not actually listed. It's architecture, landscape architecture, planning, economic development, and I'm going
Real estate.
and real estate. Thank you.
Yeah.
And real estate or relevant field. Mr. Walsh meets those qualifications and has had the support of many of us here tonight. So if that strict criteria is to be applied as Maggie and Sean have indicated, then I would suggest that we nominate and appoint Mr. Petillon and Mr. Walsh.
I don't think we're quite there yet. I think we were still waiting to see sort of the slate. And I think Rich had a question too before we begin. And Tim also would like to comment.
Well, just a couple of comments then. I mean, I think we can put forward a motion. It just needs to be seconded. And I'm not sure if that's what Cheryl is doing, and I'm fine with that, but I would just, my suggestion would be to do them one at a time as well. I know you asked that at the beginning. That would just be my suggestion. I'd go further. I might vote no, just in hopes that we do that, as some of the members of the select board did. I am looking at the language, and I know we've talked about this a lot, but I was going to say, I'm hoping we can move past it, but I get it. Folks are using the language as a means to question or test, and we should be doing that. But the fact of the matter is, many of these boards and committees that folks appoint folks to, they say similar words. It gives, it says the other members shall have experience, and it lists some, and it says, or other relevant experience. Obviously, there's a letter on the call. I'm not pretending to be one, but when something says or relevant fields, that pretty much opens the gate for folks' interpretation of what's needed on the board. And I think everyone on this committee and the select board has done a good job at voicing their opinions on what needs to be, what could be thought of what might be needed on those boards. And so I don't call into question anybody's thoughts or opinions on what they put forward. I thought everybody tonight did a great job. But the fact of the matter is, it's very vague when you put that on the end of it. And if folks are interested or are worried about the language, I would suggest that maybe our town council weigh in here. But my interpretation leaves it very open to the folks voting on it into what they deem as necessary for that board as experience.
Tim, did you want to add anything to that as well? Because in my opinion, all three of these fall into the category that would be under our shall.
Yeah, thank you, Meredith. I was actually going to say almost precisely what Rich said. I wasn't around when that town meeting vote happened, but I came in shortly after it. And I've seen similar language in other resolutions and town meeting votes. And that other relevant experience clause is almost certainly there to give both the select board and the planning board the latitude to add people to this committee that they feel is relevant. I like a lot of people, crave structure. And so the conversation tonight, I think I'm seeing a lot of folks kind of reaching out and trying to grasp for guidance. And I think that the broadness of that town meeting article means, it is up to you all to decide what the process is, and it is up to you all to decide what relevant experiences. And so it's a blessing in the sense that you've got a lot of latitude, but it's a curse in the sense that, well, where are the guardrails? So I think it's been a really interesting and at times tough conversation, but I think this is what that article is kind of meant, to be doing. The other thing I'll add, just to sort of tangentially to the relevant experience conversation, is that we all need to remember that, the master plan is not necessarily a planning and development document. And the Master Plan Implementation Committee is not a Planning Board Part 2. If you look through the goals and strategies in the master plan, there's a lot of stuff about public health and student health and proper archival procedures in town hall, and also all sorts of things that have nothing to do with architecture, design, real estate, et cetera. And so I think keeping that broad scope of, who are people that can help us achieve these goals and quite frankly, monitor the town in its achievement of these goals is really something that I think is an important focus. So just wanted to add that bit of clarification there.
Thank you. And I appreciate that. And I just wanted to make sure that I was kind of staying in my lane. And, I believe in having flexibility, and people have changes of careers and all various types of experience. I just wanted to make sure that was the word shall was kind of throwing me off.
Yeah, Maggie, you're right. Shall means shall, and your lane is very wide. So, enjoy it.
Thank you. So we have, did we want to pull up this? Oh, Sean, go ahead. Sorry, I didn't see your hand.
That's okay. I just put it up, Meredith. I may be speaking a point of view that's different from everyone else's and probably different than what Tim just explained. I don't see our lane being wide. Again, I read this. The other members shall have expertise, not experience, but expertise in planning, architecture, economic development, landscape architecture, real estate, or other relevant fields. When I went through the candidates that I had, as I said earlier, I was able to find 5 people that had experience. And from that, I was searching for expertise because that is what the article says. And as I said earlier, I feel my duty as a planning board member is to follow the language written in the article that was approved in town meeting, which I am a member of town meeting, as probably many of you are. So that is my guideline. You all have your own votes and can choose whatever your guideline is. It was really difficult for me to not include Warren Lizio. When I look at Warren Lizio's application, and Mr. Lizio was kind enough to also attach a resume, I found his experience to be substantial in real estate. And as I said previously, Dan Walsh, deep experience in real estate. Jonathan Lashley, substantial experience in architecture, which I'm around Cheryl enough. I value what an architect can bring to something that's as important as planning. John Cohane, in my opinion, and having spent 35 years in the construction industry, I do know that as contractors, it actually is quite wide, the experience that we all have. And it does actually allow us to be experienced in development in addition to construction. So again, I go back to my point when I started earlier, I am following, and I feel it's my obligation to follow what the language of the article is with regard to Mr. Petillon, because it seems we'll have a conversation of his qualifications, and I am going to hold up for the camera. The only thing, this particular application has a section, and it reads, what experience, comma, skills, comma, insight, comma, education, comma, or special training would you bring to the board/committee? 2 words are written, experienced developer. That's it. There's nothing else. I do not know the man. He had an opportunity to explain his experience, his background, his knowledge, and there's 2 words that are there. So based on what I feel is my responsibility to appoint somebody to a group that is the Master Plan Implementation Committee, those 2 words do not give me the confidence that that person has the experience or the ability to perform the duties of a person on the MPIC. I just wanted to take the opportunity, Chair Hall, to explain my perspective and and my point of view. Thank you.
Sean. And Rich, you had your hand up.
Yes. Yep. Just 2 points real quick. And I'm not positive, but I'm pretty sure. I thought everyone had submitted a resume, but I could be wrong about that one. So at some point, maybe somebody could mention if they all did, and if this one in question didn't or did. Secondly, I'm not looking to change anybody's opinions. Everybody should have their own opinion on how they are doing things. But we definitely have a lot of folks in town watching this. So I want to make sure that, we are making sure that they understand what our job is and what what was in the town meeting and things like that. So, we're lucky today. We have town council here. Can we hear from town council and his opinion on that language in that we're all referring to?
As the chair, this all
Kevin,
allow
is he still
town
on?
council
Yes.
to hold on.
Absolutely. Kevin, are you available to speak on this?
We aren't usually this lucky, so I figure why not?
Good
Yes,
evening,
good
Kevin.
evening.
Thank you.
Yes, so I think the answer to the question is it's up to all of you to decide what other relevant fields means. You have the information, you have the resumes and the applications before you. And now you have to determine for yourselves what you believe other relevant fields are and whether or not certain appointees or candidates fill those. That is your job. It's not my job to weigh in on that particular issue. Thank you.
Thank you.
Right, Jake.
That's all I was looking for. Thank you.
And Sean, did you have something you wanted to add, or your hand is still up?
I do. Rich, for clarification, the information that was provided by Tim had 10 applications. Of the 10 applications, 3 of the applications have resumes attached to them. Tim, if I'm incorrect, please correct me for the record. Jonathan Lashley had a resume attached. These are 3 that had resumes attached. Jonathan Lashley, Rachel Peters Card, and Warren Lizio. That's it. And also for the record, if this process is to be done in the future, I think to request a resume of an applicant is a fair request and quite honestly, very valuable to all of us as we review the candidates. But only 3 resumes, Rich, were given to us by Tim, and I believe that's probably all Tim has.
I appreciate that.
And I will say that all applicants were reached out to following their initial application and given every opportunity to either provide a resume or a 1-page description of their experience. So we did something that we don't do for other committees. We actually went back to them and gave them a second opportunity to provide any relevant information. So that is all we had. So thank you for that question. And Cheryl, yes, you have your hand up.
Yes, thank you. I know that the select board has a committee that's working on how to better serve the town with the committees that we have and how to recruit and nominate people. And I hope that this will be a topic that they will take up in terms of the form. The online form doesn't actually ask for an applicant to submit a resume. So unless one is following that carefully, they would not know. And the other thing is that the email that went out to the applicants went out probably a week before this meeting. So I don't think there was a lot of time for them to submit. I could be wrong about the exact date. I mentioned in my disclosure that I do know Mr. Petillon. Others mentioned that they know people and they know things about them from conversations they've had, like Mr. Cohane. So I will offer some information that I know about Mr. Petillon. He has a Bachelor of Science and a Master of Science in Engineering, and he has an MBA. And he has experience as a real estate developer.
Any questions following that? Sean? Yes.
Cheryl, could you help me understand what experience as a real estate developer Mr. Petion has. I do not know any of the 10 applicants, so I'm at a bit of a disadvantage. But if you could explain what experience he has as a developer, I'd appreciate it.
I'm not familiar with all of Mr. Petion's real estate experience. I can only speak to the project that I've been engaged to provide services for, as I disclosed earlier, is for a mixed-use development that includes commercial and condominium units in Mattapan.
Does he have other projects that he's developed?
I actually don't know. And if we had an interview process, we could ask he and other applicants more specifics about their expertise. That opportunity is not afforded to any one of the 10 applicants.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay. Any other questions or comments before we call for a motion? Seeing none.
Wait, can we get that spreadsheet? Is that spreadsheet available?
Yes, is that possible?
Yep.
Thank you.
Here it is. Let me know if that's big enough and that we're looking at the correct one here.
Thank you.
Okay. So are we ready to move to, if we're ready to move to a motion, I would like to defer to the board if we would like to submit one candidate at a time, or if we would like to submit 2 candidates at a time. There's a Cheryl?
Given that we need to come to consensus with the select board, I suggest 1 at a time.
Okay.
And if I may, I would like to make one last pitch for achieving diversity on this committee in terms of Aaron's comment earlier, seeing all white faces on the screen. And so I would appeal to my candidate of color that could ably serve on this committee. And I would like to nominate or make a motion to appoint Dimitri Petion to the Master Plan Implementation Committee.
I would second that.
Second, okay. Then we can go to a roll call vote. Let's begin with Sean.
No, based on the experience that I just am not being afforded.
Thank you. Rich?
Yes.
Maggie?
No, for the same reason as Sean stated.
And Cheryl?
Yes.
And as for myself, I first want to say that diversity can come in many different ways. And I think that was really, spelled out really well, Cheryl, earlier in the evening, that there are many ways that people can be diverse without necessarily being the color of their skin and the location where they live. And I'll address that later in someone who I would like to support. I also don't have, I feel like, enough information. I understand Dimitri is a really nice guy from people who know them. I've heard nothing but good things. But the fact that we only know that this may be his first project. As far as we know, we don't know of any others. And, you know, it just was, there was not enough information. And I do like the idea of maybe interviewing people and being able to speak with people, but, you know, there just was not enough information on his application. So I'm a no on that too.
Can I just make one comment? I know you have your opportunity and right to vote, but let's don't apply different criteria to this applicant than we apply to other applicants. When you said you don't know whether this applicant has any more experience on one project, what do you know about real estate experience and how much of it some of the others have? How many construction projects has Mr. Cohen actually built? How many projects has he completed the HERS rating on? I don't think it's a fair evaluation.
Thank you.
Whatsoever.
Cheryl, we all had a chance to review the applications. There's extensive specific information given on other applications. So I'll just leave it at that. Thank you. Okay. Thank you so much. So would we like to now move on to, is there a motion for another applicant that the board would like to make?
I would like to make a motion to nominate Dan Walsh to the MPIC committee.
Is there a second?
I'll second the motion.
Thank you. Thank you. We have a second. Okay, then we'll take a roll call vote on Dan Walsh. Cheryl?
Yes.
Sean?
Yes.
Maggie?
Yes.
Rich?
No.
And myself. And I do want to just, again, reiterate the diversity for not only precinct, which is underrepresented in our town, but Dan is a gay man, and I think that is diverse. I think that is something that I've heard Aaron mentioned quite a bit, you know, that is something that is lacking on our board. So I don't want anyone to feel like I am overlooking diversity of geographic region representing, you know, underrepresented neighborhoods, and somebody who is a gay man and very proud to be that. So I just would like to support that nomination. Yes. Okay. So moving on, do we have a motion for a second applicant? Thinking over.
Meredith, I would make a motion to appoint John Cohen.
Is there a second to that?
I second that.
Okay. I'd like to take a roll call vote then on that. Sean?
Yes.
Rich?
Yes.
Maggie?
Yes.
Cheryl?
No, and I'm going to explain again a little bit about that. I think Mr. Cohen used the opportunity to reach out to some members of the select board and perhaps some members of the planning board. Not all members of each board, and certainly you know, not to the master plan implementation committee. I would say that at one meeting that he did attend at the master plan implementation committee, you know, his behavior was, I would say, less than congenial. And I would hope that if he does make it onto this committee, that he reconsider the way he approaches his volunteer work on the committee. So I'm a no.
Thank you, Cheryl.
So I'd like a point of order on that. I attended that meeting, and that meeting was held on Juneteenth, and it was not John Cohen who brought up the fact that it was inappropriate to meet at that meeting. It was another resident. So I just don't want John Cohen to be unfairly represented. Thank you.
Thank you, Maggie. Okay, and I would be a yes for John. Okay. So we have Chair Doyle?
Thank you, Chair Hall. We have one appointment that has been made by both boards to the Master Plan Implementation Committee and John Cohane. The Select Board has appointed Mr. Petillon by its vote, the Planning Board, Mr. Walsh by its vote. So I guess it comes back now to the Select Board to begin the discussion on where we would go from here, since we are at an impasse at this point on the second vote. The second.
Chair, Mr. Chair,
Mr. Wells, you're recognized.
I make a motion to reaffirm our vote to appoint Mr. Petillon to the MPIC.
Is there a second on that vote, please? Motion rather.
I'll second that. I'll second that.
It has been moved and seconded. Is there any discussion? Seeing none, roll call vote. Mr. Zulus,
Yes.
Mr. Wells,
Yes.
Ms. Bradley,
Yes.
Ms. Musto. You're on mute, Roxanne.
I apologize. I'd say, given the new information on Mr. Walsh, I'm going to say no on this.
And Mr. Doyle, yes.
Okay. Thank you.
I guess the ball goes back to your court.
Okay.
Chair
So
Hall.
I think it opens, again, Mr. Walsh, the one thing I would like to say about Mr. Walsh is I listened to the MPIC, their discussion when they were going through all of the applicants and all of their discussion. And they actually ranked them in their discussion, and they actually came out, they ended up putting, forth their 3 people, but if you listened closely, and it's on recording, that Dan Walsh seemed to be the unanimous, the number 1 person for all of MPIC. And they put his name forward and it sounded like he was definitely a clear leader. And I think, Cheryl, even in the discussion, you said there's so many different things that are important that you are looking for and the MPIC is looking for that he would represent in serving on MPIC. And so I thought that was very interesting, and that I thought that would be for sure one of your top people, because it sounded like, coming from MPIC, that was one of theirs. So
May I, Meredith?
yes, absolutely.
Yeah, the Master Plan Implementation Committee did support Mr. Walsh, but we also wanted to see one person of color, and that was Mr. Petillon or Ms. Campbell Malone. And so to isolate the discussion about Mr. Walsh separate from the other, I think is not really appropriate. So I would just like to say that in light of the both boards nominating appointing Mr. Cohane, I would like for this board to consider agreeing with the Select Board and appointing Mr. Petillon.
I had my hand up. I was going to make that motion too.
Go ahead.
Motion, Cheryl, or was that you were just recommending?
You're what? I didn't.
No,
that was just a discussion, but yeah.
I was gonna make a motion that the board reconsiders their vote on Mr. Petillon. I agree with all the comments tonight about Mr. Petillon, and I think it's for the right reasons. So I just my motion is for the planning board to reconsider that vote. I'll further that, sorry, and then ask for a second. I'm afraid that we might be filling one position tonight. So I just asked the board to reconsider.
I will second the motion.
For those who would like to, I'm sorry, Mr. Wells and Maggie both have their hands up. I don't know if you want to add something to this discussion.
Yeah, so I just wanted to, I was going back to the original the original article that town meeting passed. And again, it says shall have experience. So we can provide flexibility, I think, with other relevant fields. But when you guys were just discussing what Mr. Petillon's experience is or how much experience he has, and again, I don't trust Google, but I just did a quick Google search and his LinkedIn profile came up, and it basically, it says it's the president of for operational efficiencies for patient intake.
A point of order. I mean,
cancer treatment facilities. And I am extremely grateful for that. I've been through cancer personally, and I can appreciate all that he's done. But in this particular position, I'm just not sure if he has the experience.
I don't know if you can hear me. My understanding of the point of the order, you're supposed to stop and discuss it.
Sorry. Yeah, go ahead, Rich.
That was confusing to me. But my point of order is I'm not sure what we're doing at this point, but it sounds like we're getting very personal and starting to Google search people. I mean, we've had our time to vet people. We all came together in good faith to put forward our thoughts and recommendations. And I do appreciate everybody is advocating for their person of choice. But I think we should just tread lightly on telling other folks that they don't have credibility in their recommendations. And by continuing to say what the town meeting has asked for is kind of, in my opinion, doing that. And that's why I asked town council to weigh in. And I think we heard town council say it is up to us. And so I appreciate every single person on here and what they're putting forward. So I think we're treading down a bad road when we start, Google searching folks.
Thank you, Rich. Richard, you had your hand up earlier.
I'll wait to be recognized by Mr. Doyle. I'll allow you to have your conversation whenever Arthur's ready.
Cheryl, you had your hand up.
I just really, again, want to reiterate how inappropriate I think it is to scrutinize one of two people of color who applied for this. What does that say about whether other people are going to be interested in applying for committees in this town? What does it say about the elected officials who are all white, who are here making the appointments? I think it says a really bad thing. We're being exclusionary yet again. I don't think holding Mr. Petillon to a different level of criteria and scrutiny is appropriate whatsoever. You have the information that's in the applications. That's all any of us have, and that's what we should go by. And because others added information about others that they know who are applicants, I added some additional information to Mr. Petillon. But otherwise, if we didn't think we should have enough information, we shouldn't have had this meeting, and we should have asked for additional information before having this meeting.
Thank you, Cheryl. And we did exactly for that reason, ask for additional information from all of the applicants to make sure we had everything possible. So I think what we have before us is only the information on those applications that we can go by. And that's all we have. So we are looking at, the criteria of what we're asked to do, and what is provided. And we're nothing else. There's not a different basis of.
Chair Hall, you have one other member of your board to be recognized, and then I'd be able to go to the select board members.
Thank you. Okay. We have not had our, yeah.
We had a motion though, and it was seconded, I thought.
Cheryl, sorry.
I just want to clarify that I did second that motion.
There's a motion.
And Sean, you had your hand up.
I just wanted to respond to Cheryl. Cheryl, again, 9 out of the 10 applicants provided a significant, I guess, written explanation of their qualifications. 9 out of the 10. And I'm not saying that all 9 out of the 10 that their written explanation of the qualifications meet the criteria that I'm using, which is what I've stated a few times. But Mr. Petion, and he could be a tremendous person. I'm not judging the person's character at all. And I have no bias, none whatsoever. But what I care about is the qualifications to perform the duties of the role. And again, it's right there. If you can see, it's 2 words. That's it. That's all I have been given. And when I asked you to explain what knowledge you have of his experience as a developer, you can only refer to the project that your firm is involved with. That to me is not substantial enough to warrant voting for a person that is required to have expertise in planning, architecture, economic development, landscape architecture, real estate, or other relevant fields.
I'll just respond
And if I
that
could,
Mr. Cohen's experience.
I'd just like to finish for a moment, please.
Sure.
To suggest that any one of us have a bias, I find offensive. I do not. Thank you.
I'll point out again that others on this board have said that the strict description in the qualifications is what guides them. They voted for Mr. Cohen, who doesn't fit that strict description. So if we have leeway there, we have leeway in what expertise, what level of experience, and whether it's a relevant field or not. And so the criteria of how much expertise someone has is not evident in all 10 of these applications. You know, some people, I looked carefully at what Regina Campbell Malone wrote, for example, about applying her expertise in science and how that, and expertise in education, and how the schools and how community building and other things, her expertise is not necessarily tied only to science. So we're splitting hairs here when we're talking about somebody's expertise, that this person didn't provide you enough information about expertise. And so, you know, again, I feel it strongly that this town needs to have diversification in its committees, diversification in its elected positions. I think we have an opportunity to do that here to make a good first step.
Thank you. Okay, so Cheryl, there was a motion. But Rich, was that your motion to reconsider Mr. Petion?
I put forward a motion to vote on, I put together a motion to vote on Mr. Petion. And my suggestion was at that to the board to reconsider their vote.
And Cheryl, was that a second you made to that? So we have a second. Sean, you have your hand up. Discussion.
I apologize. I meant to lower my hand.
Okay. So is there any discussion from the planning board further? If not, I would go to a roll call vote. Voting on the motion and the second. I'd like to go to Cheryl.
Yes.
Rich?
Yes.
Sean?
No.
Maggie?
No.
And myself, for the same reasons, no. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair Hall. I'll now go to the select board members, recognize them in what I believe is the following order in which they raise their hands. Mr. Wells, Ms. Bradley, Mr. Zulus, and Ms. Musto. Correct me if I'm wrong in that. Mr. Wells.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chair. And for some of my colleagues on this board, you've heard me say this before, but for the planning board members, many of you know me, but you don't know me and how I view this. You know, I'm a white Irish Catholic. My grandparents immigrated to this town from Ireland over 75 years ago. It was a very white Irish Catholic community. That wasn't a very white Irish Catholic community. It was actually a very Yankee community. I can remember my grandmother who lived in Warren Ave telling about waking up on a Sunday morning with a sign and tomatoes smashed in a windshield. No Irish need to live here and go home. But this is the year 2022. And if there's one thing I learned in my 34 years in the police department, it was instilled in me by Chief Murray before that, and probably into him from Chief Wells, my own father before that, is that to effectively police your community, the police department needs to be reflective of the community that serves. That statement could be no truer to each of us, to all of us in government, to every department, to all of us elected officials. We had a chance here. We have a chance here tonight. Did I think we would be able to appoint 2 people of color? No. We have a chance here to appoint a person of color, a faction of this community that is growing each and every day. Last week, I spoke about the need for a new turf field that the Parks have been fighting for so long and so hard for the past 7 years. Well, if any of you take the time on any summer or weekend night, go to Guile Field and just take a good look at how diverse this community is. I hate to say that, I almost feel like, and I've lived through, when I first became a policeman, the realtors in this town were all cited by the AG's office for redlining people of color trying to buy here. Several years later, our own police department was cited by the Globe on stopping inappropriate numbers of people of color driving through the town. Was it very tough to deal with? It was. But sometimes when you live directly next to some of the most violent sections of the city, I could see how those things in that perception could happen. We have a chance. We are scrutinizing a gentleman who's taken the risk to put his name forward. A person of a category of race and color that is smaller in this community than all of us. As Ms. Bradley says, you're looking at 10 white faces here tonight. That's pretty much the same on town meeting, school committee, it's minority, other departments in town hall. I think and I don't know who said it, we are scrutinizing one candidate more than others. And I just realized tonight that Dan Walsh was the applicant, is someone I've known many years ago. I had asked earlier if it was him. I was told no, I didn't think it was him. And he's a good man, I agree. He's a very good man. We have an obligation as an elected officials, just as much as we want to fight, talk about how we represent precincts, we have an obligation to represent all of the residents, races, categories, creeds, religions of this community. And I implore you, the 5 of you, not my colleagues, the 5 of you, you have a chance to make history tonight. It may not seem, is it a World Series? No. Is it a Super Bowl? No. But you're taking a vote to appoint someone to a committee who had the courage to apply. And I know how hard it is to attract minority candidates to come on the police department that pays them $100,000 a year to start and to keep them there. What does this message say to Mr. Petion and any other person of color who wants to apply for a position, a committee, to run or be employed or live here in the future? And you may not agree with me, but I say this to you. The most violent things that have happened in this community in the past 10 years that I've been witness to, sadly, were the most unaffected, the poorest, the people who had the most difficult, the people struggled just like my grandparents struggled 70 years ago to become a strong and vocal part of this community. We owe Mr. Petion this vote.
Thank you, Mr. Wells. Ms. Bradley, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Let me turn my video on. I turn it off so you can see my hand. If we went back to the original document, which members of the planning board keeps talking about, the original document that implemented the MPIC back in 2014, with no change, it's fascinating to me. Because if we go back to the original document that started this country, Chairwoman Hall would not have a vote. I would not have a vote, neither would Member Oldfield. It would take many, many decades before Black men had the right to anything, to vote, because before that, they were 3/5 of a person. So as we sit here tonight and we talk about original planning and the original document that was laid before us in 2014, do you not all think that we can evolve and come up with a new idea, which is to create diversity 9 years later? I said this weeks ago, and I'm going to say it again. We have an obligation to our town. Mr. Petrion's resume absolutely exemplifies what we want on a committee. The fact that we just nominated a 66-year-old white man again to a committee in our town says something. And here we are arguing about, wait, yet another man. Women in this town, just FYI, make up less than 1/3 of the people that are appointed to committees. Out of the 376 open positions on committees, only 249 of them are women. None of us discussed a woman tonight, which I believe Miss Regina Campbell Malone has extraordinary requirements to be on this committee. She's engaged in her community. I believe I heard somebody on the planning board recently talk about whether or not they can engage their neighbors. That should be a qualification. Well, let me tell you something, Miss Malone can do that. But we don't talk about that. We don't talk about what's actually happening here. You have 2 people from Precinct 1 that applied to be on this committee. And the fact that all of you are sitting here behind the original document, well, shoot darn, half of you couldn't even vote on the original document because you don't get the right to vote. So keep it up. Keep not moving forward with where we need to be as a town, because we can see it. It is blatant. It is unbelievable, and it is disgusting. And the fact that we are singling out Black people,
can I say?
We are singling out, no, Meredith, I'm sorry, but no.
I want to add, this is
out a Black man.
Relevant to the conversation, Aaron. Will you please, I'm sorry to interrupt, Mr.
You
Chair
have to,
Doyle.
that's not how this works. I'm sorry, somebody
Chair
else
Doyle.
interrupted.
Madam Chair, I think you should be addressing me on this.
Thank you, Arthur.
May I say something, please?
No, you have to address the chair.
I am addressing the chair.
Ms.
It's
Hall,
relevant. It's relevant.
I
to Mr.
recognize
Hall.
several other people first. Can I come back to you after I recognize
No, this
them?
is relevant.
Thank you, Mr.
This
Chair.
is
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you.
It's relevant to Mr. Walsh.
I appreciate all of this. And Mr. Walsh
Mr. Doyle.
is not what we were discussing.
End of discussion, please.
Fine.
I
You all
have
heard my point.
recognized 2 people, and then I will come pleasingly back to you, Ms. Hall. They are Mr. Zulus and Ms. Musto.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just to correct Aaron, I did discuss Ms. Malone. She was my number 1 choice. Nobody's biased. Everyone looks at things evenly and fairly. And yet we have the uncomfortable coincidence that somehow we can't vote for a Black or a brown person. Richard's right. Aaron's right. The MPIC was right when they proposed this article and when they proposed the members to this board. We need greater representation. We need more diversity. we need more inclusion. It is unfortunate that many people are watching this meeting tonight, because I dare say that a great number of them will have no interest in serving on a committee in this town, and will have no interest in trying to join a committee in this town. And so my hope is that the planning board will reconsider. If they don't intend to do that, I would ask the chair, as a matter of process, if we are at a stalemate, that we take a cumulative vote and move forward in that way, so that we can get a second member appointed to this committee. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Silvers. Ms. Musto.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I want to thank Richard Wells for his past comments that he just made. It made a lot of sense to me. I do want to say a few things here. I want to say, first of all, that some of the comments that people have made here have been quite offensive, almost implying that because we're made up of white people here, that we may be inherently racist or, something like that. And that is far from the truth. We are all different. We're all coming from different backgrounds, different ethnicities, different ways that we grew up, different viewpoints. And I think that's okay. I don't think that's a problem. I think we have to embrace the fact that we have a diverse community. We have great candidates that applied for these positions. As far as Dimitri Petion, I actually do know him. He has very good character. I know him. My son went to elementary school at Tucker, the most diverse school in our whole system. I worked with Dimitri on a lot of things. Definitely, I'm happy to put him forward if we're going to change the vote around again. I don't want to think that I'm not. I also like Dan Walsh, but I do want you to understand. No, I want you to understand that the issue here for me is that we're trying to imply that the color of skin, somebody's skin, makes them worthy of a position. And I want to say that that anyone can be representative of the community. You could be any background. I think we want to make sure that we do reflect the community, and I appreciate that. As I said, I believe he has good character, and that's fine. And I would put him forward for that. But I don't like this implication that people that have a different viewpoint may be inherently racist, or, they're not representing the town. And by you looking at a board, we have all white people, that's wrong. That's wrong. And we shouldn't be doing that. And I find that offensive. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Musto. And as promised, Chair Hall, to you.
Yes, thank you, Chair Doyle. This discussion has been a difficult one. Was said on behalf of Mr. Petion, but at this point, Dan Walsh has just texted me and would like to withdraw his application because he does not want to be the one and seen as the one who, if for some reason if he was appointed, would have not let Mr. Petion on. So Mr. Walsh, Dan is withdrawing his application at this point. He no longer has interest. So.
Ms. Hall, you have the floor, and you have a member of the planning board with a hand to be recognized, two of them, and then I'll go to Mr. Wells.
Sean, you did have your hand up first.
Thank you, Meredith. Thank you, Arthur. I am really disappointed in the course of some of the discussion that's taken place tonight. I have a pretty good understanding of adversity. I'm a first generation American. My parents are both immigrants, and they lived adversity when they arrived here in America. I have no biases towards anybody, gender, ethnicity, color. I'm president of a 110-person organization. I'm stunned that I even have to say this, but because of some of the conversation earlier, I feel like it's worthy. I hire without regard to anything except for qualifications to perform the duties of the role. I don't think the process was well established in terms of how we were to consider the candidates. I have repeatedly stated that I thought I was expected to consider applicants for their ability to fulfill what is written into Article 13 and subsequently carried forth when Article 17 was created. I don't know Mr. Petion's expertise. I don't know his experience. His most ardent advocate, Cheryl, hasn't been able to explain what his experience is beyond the single project that her firm is working with Mr. Petion on. That all said, and I do appreciate the perspective of everyone, and I hope that the members of the select board and the planning board, as I appreciate everyone's perspective, would also appreciate mine. That all said, I am changing my vote to support Mr. Petion and not succumbing to pressure from anyone. That is not my reason for doing it. My reason for doing it is that I think the process was not well laid out for all of us. Some are voting based on different criteria than others. It is not worth it to continue this type of a discussion amongst two very important boards in town and exchange accusations, which I think only devalues all of us in the eyes of the public. I'm prepared to vote with Cheryl and with Rich to support Mr. Petion for the Master Plan Implementation Committee. Thank you.
Thank you, Sean. Do we want to revisit the motion now that we have Cheryl? Yes.
Putting my hand up, yes.
Sure.
You know, this discussion where I talked about having a different set of criteria being used to evaluate Mr. Petion, I just received a couple of messages for him. He said that he's withdrawing, that he will not serve. He doesn't appreciate a different set of criteria being used for him. And he says that it is exhibiting bias that exists in the town. So I think this meeting, I'd rather have us reconvene at this point. I think this has not been a good meeting.
Yeah. Chair Doyle? Well, Mike.
You have a hand, you have someone to recognize?
Sean, yes. You have your hand up again, Sean?
I apologize. I intended to lower it.
Thank you, Chair Hall. Mr. Zulus, you are recognized.
Mr. Chair, are we taking motions for a, now that we've lost at least two of the candidates, are we taking motions for another one? If so,
Yeah.
I'll make.
The floor is open. Mr. Zulus, please.
I'll make a motion to appoint Regina Campbell Malone to this Master Plan Implementation Committee.
I'll second that.
It's been moved and seconded. Is there any further discussion?
Mr. Chair,
Mr. Wells, you're recognized.
my thought is to, I'm going to vote no on the motion. My thought is that we should go with the one appointment and re-advertise, because there seems to be some concerns about the process here, re-advertise the second position, and come back and revisit this at a later time. It's just my thought on it. That's my point of discussion. I get it. I get there's a motion on the floor. That's just my thoughts.
Appreciate it. Mr. Zulus, you have a motion, correct?
That's correct.
Is there a second to Mr. Zulus' motion? Ms. Bradley has seconded.
Yes. And Mr. Chair, if the criteria, as Mr. Wells was saying, is incorrect, then we should reconsider all the votes this evening. Because then one vote wouldn't matter if the criteria, and we're going to put back out for more applications, then we should put back out for more applications. I don't believe that that is the right route to go. I think that we had 10 amazing people that applied, many of whom were diverse from their precincts. And I think we should move forward as best we can now that 2 have withdrawn their names. And I think that it was a fair process that was put out to everybody. I mean, the town, I want to say Lynn, Lynn and the rest of the crew put out to everybody that this was open. I don't know that the application process was biased. I don't think that it was. Honestly, I don't think that it was. And so I don't know that we want to go back to square one. I am a bit taken aback that so many people have withdrawn this evening, but I'm not surprised given the intensity of the night and where we're at with trying to get get a diverse board in front of us. So I stand by seconding Regina Campbell.
And Mr. Wells, you recognized during discussion.
Yeah, so I'm going to vote no on this motion, Mr. Chair, but that's just what I think we should do. Thank you.
Motion has been, Mrs. Zullis.
Just to reiterate, Mr. Chair, Ms. Campbell Malone comes from Precinct 1, underrepresented in this town. I'm underrepresented on this committee. She represents a diverse background. She has expertise in not only community engagement and education, which I think are certainly relevant factors for the MPIC. As to whether we should start the process all over again, we still have candidates. We have a couple who stepped aside, but we still have candidates. Ms. Campbell Malone is also a scientist. She brings that to bear, and a doctor. So I think she would be. As I'll repeat what I said some hours ago, which is that I think she would be an outstanding candidate, and I hope that both boards can support her. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
You're very welcome, Mr. Zullis. And Ms. Musto, I saw your hand. You're recognized.
Thank you, Chair Doyle. What I would like to say is, if Dimitri is listening to this meeting, I really think he should reconsider. He definitely had support from people. You know, this whole process is a difficult process. But I do think that, you know, it would be worthy of him to really reconsider withdrawing at this point.
Thank you, Ms. Musto. I would be open to someone making that request of him to see what his disposition would be.
I would support that, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Wells. Mr. Gias, do you have access to Dimitri?
I do. I will send him a message. I will say that before I announced it, I said, "Are you sure?" And he said yes, but I just sent him another message, and I'll let you know if I hear back from him.
Ms. Musto.
I would say to Mr. Gaius, I think it's really important that he understand that this is a process, and it was a pretty fruitful process, or however you want to describe it, but that certainly I think that there is support for him. And I would hate for him to withdraw because of this, if you want to say crazy process or whatever we did here tonight. I really would hope that he would really rethink that, because I think that, you know, he's a good character. Thank you.
Mr. Zullis.
Mr. Chair, we have a motion on the floor.
Yes, we do. And we can vote that up. We just want down. We just want to get a piece of information that came out of the related discussion.
Well, with
I understand.
The motion will stand anyway, Mr. Chair.
It does. Recognized.
Mr. Chair, I just want to say that she's a doctor. It's Dr. Regina Campbell Malone. She has a doctorate from MIT. I just want to make sure that when we refer to her, we refer to her properly.
Thank you, Ms. Bradley. Yes, Mr. Giles.
I just want to add, if I may, about Ms. Campbell Malone. I have not heard back from Mr. Petillon. Ms. Campbell Malone was supported by the MPIC. We did see that her experience as a scientist and educator, one who's active and engaged in her community, in the school committee, or in the school community as well. And she explicitly stated that she has an interest in seeing broad participation in town affairs. And so I just wanted to remind you folks that she was recommended by the MPIC.
Thank you for that. Mr. Zulus.
Mr. Chair, are we gonna go to a vote on the motion?
Yes, we are. I just want to recognize Ms. Musto.
Yes, I just wanted to say that as sitting on the MPIC as a select board rep, there was some thought about whether that qualification really, her qualifications really met the criteria. And that was why we did have 3 candidates. Thank you.
Mr. Wells.
I agree with Ms. Musto on both points. And my final thing is that we just appointed a person to a position in this community. And I could see, and I do not know this man, and I could see why he emailed Cheryl. And I'm not prepared to walk away from him. I intend to stick with my vote for him, and I intend to do everything I can to encourage him to take this position and to provide the expertise and guidance that for which the reason for which he first applied. It took a lot of work and discussion, some of it very uncomfortable tonight, to get to where the planning board was about, what I believe was about to take a final positive vote, which would have confirmed him. I think we owe it to him to stand by him. Thank you.
Mr. Zulus, a question we still have not had an answer back. Is this something that we could table until we have an answer and then come back for a vote? Would you be agreeable to that?
No, sir. We have no, sir. We have a motion on the floor. I think we should move
I understand. Yeah, just wanted to ask that question. Okay, so not having heard back, the motion has been seconded. Roll call vote. Mr. Zulus?
Yes.
Mr. Wells?
No.
Ms. Bradley?
Yes.
Ms. Musto?
No.
Mr. Doyle, yes.
Mr. Chair, if I may.
Yes, I just want to add that my vote goes again to what I had said prior to the nomination of candidates, into the recognition of skills transferability. That's very, very important. It's a gift and should not be overlooked. Mr. Giles.
I just wanted to let you know I did hear back from Mr. Petillon that he is not reconsidering.
Thank you very kindly. That settles that matter. Appreciate it. Ms. Hall, it's back to you at this time for any further comment.
I would leave it up for a motion.
I had my hand raised.
Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah, Rich, go ahead.
For a while. I didn't want to interrupt the other board. I would have loved to say this before their vote, the select board vote, but I would kind of, my suggestion, or I would implore to the 2 groups. I don't remember exactly what Member Wells said, but I think I'm in the same camp. We had everybody, the 2 people that are backing out because of what they're hearing tonight. And the comment that Mr. Gaius made on the reason for Mr. Pentillon's reason for backing out, I don't want to speak for him, so I'm not speaking for you, Mr. Pentillon, but it sounded very much the words Cheryl used, that it sounded like he was disgusted in what he heard tonight. And to be quite honest, I really do respect the select board. So I really, I do respect the folks that you put forward, but I don't think seeing people back out of this based on what they're seeing, we should look at as a win. we shouldn't. And I really do think that I'm not going to vote moving forward. And so I'm obviously one of 10. And so you folks can move forward and vote in a second person. But I think it's the wrong thing to do for this town. I think we should take a break, and we maybe reach out to folks again and say, gauge interest, and then do it again. I think it wasn't a great meeting tonight. Going through some of this, and I would implore the team not to look at this as a win, that we've just shortened the playing field. That's my comment.
That ties into my question as to whether or not we should table this matter. Regroup, have a meeting of Chair Hall and myself for the parties, and reach out and come back for a second round for the second appointment. I'd be interested in any response to that.
Mr. Chair, do you want that in the form of a motion?
I would accept that from you, Mr. Wells, please.
Mr. Chair, I'd make a motion that we table this topic, this meeting for tonight, and come back to revisit this both boards at a later date to be determined by you and Chair Hall.
That is a motion from Mr. Wells for the select board. Is there a second to that, please?
I will second that.
Seconded by Ms. Musto. Mr. Zulus, you're recognized.
Okay, so the select board voted, is proposing a candidate. I don't understand why we would now go back and table it. Seems to me it's up to the planning board to see which way the planning board wants to go. I guess I don't understand, since the select board has taken a position on a second candidate, why we would go back and somehow table a vote that we've already taken. So I asked the question, Mr. Chair, on process, because I don't.
No, that's fair. It's only because I did not observe a take up by the planning board to move to a next round of vote.
Meredith, can we have a discussion amongst the 5 of us before they take their vote, please?
Yes, absolutely. Is that okay, Chair Doyle?
Yes, please go ahead. Proceed.
Thank you. Cheryl?
Yes, I just want to reiterate what I said about the Master Plan Implementation Committee and myself recommending Regina Campbell Malone for the reasons that Mr. Zulus put forth, for the reasons that I put forth before. While I am actually distressed about the way this meeting went tonight, I'm distressed about the discussion and what the candidates who withdrew, what they saw in terms of this process. However, there are other candidates, as Mr. Zulus said, who have not withdrawn, who've been watching this meeting most likely, and who put forth their applications in good faith like all 10 of them did. And so I would like us to move forward with the vote. And I would like to put forth a motion to appoint Regina Campbell Malone to the Master Plan Implementation Committee.
I just have a question for clarification, Chair Doyle. We are all in agreement that we have one nominee, correct? That we have appointed jointly. That
is correct.
So it's one person that we're looking at.
Meredith, can I just add one comment to that question?
You need a second. You guys, you need a second. You can't talk until there's a second.
Yes, I'm just asking for clarification on process. Is there a second?
Do that.
I will second Cheryl's nomination.
Thank you.
I just had a question. It was on process also, if I may, Meredith.
Yes.
If you could ask Chair Doyle, or if your suggestion was on tabling that your votes would stand, because my suggestion would be if we tabled that the votes would start over again, because there would be no reason to not consider, if you're going to open it back up, why go forward with one and not another? So I just want to get that out there, but I feel strongly about moving forward with the motion that I did make tonight, just now.
And it was
The
seconded.
the chair recognizes that and would put that precedent over tabling.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So we have a motion and we have a second. So we can have a roll call vote. Unless, I'm sorry, Rich, did you have a question or was that?
I'm a little confused at what was just talked about. I'm thinking, so let me just, what I was going to say before Chair Doyle spoke, but I think I understand where you went with that, Chair Doyle, but I'll say it anyway. I would not be in favor of not putting the one forward we already voted on. That was a vote that was taken. It's kind of done. You'd have to re-vote all that to get everybody to say no for it. So I don't think you can do that. And I'm not thinking that's what you're saying, but it sounded like it was one comment. I don't remember. I thought I just heard somebody say the alternative, like that it wouldn't go forward. So I just wanted to make sure that that's not what we're talking about here.
You have a motion in the planning board on the floor that's been seconded. If there's a problem after you take your vote, we can always check with legal counsel.
Okay.
If that's acceptable. So I turn back to you, Chair Hall.
Yes, so unless there's further discussion, we're ready for a roll call vote. All in
Wait, could you
favor?
clarify what we're voting on?
We are.
Because I didn't, and who seconded?
It was Cheryl made the motion for Regina Campbell Malone and Sean seconded it.
I missed that. Thank you.
Thank you. So roll call vote, all in favor? Cheryl?
Yes.
Sean?
Yes.
Maggie?
No.
And myself, yes.
I get a vote?
Rich?
Does Rich have a
Rich,
vote?
sorry, Rich, of course. Rich,
No.
okay. Then we have our second.
So you have, Madam Chair, a vote of 3-2.
3-2, correct.
Okay, so the motion succeeded. So this is now a second appointment by the joint select board and planning board meeting to the master plan implementation committee, which fulfills our responsibility for the evening. And that being the case, I think the next order of business, Madam Chair, would be a vote, a motion and a vote to, I'm sorry, Mr. Wallace, I didn't see.
I'm making a motion to adjourn, Mr. Chair.
Okay, I was just asking the planning board if they would do that, and then the select board would follow. So if you could hold your motion for half a second, we'll get right to it.
You got it.
Thank you. So, Chair Hall?
Yes, if I could have a motion to adjourn the planning board meeting this evening?
I'll make the motion.
Second.
All in favor? Cheryl?
Yes.
Maggie?
Yes.
Rich?
Yes.
Sean?
Yes.
And myself, yes.
Thank you. And now, Mr. Wells, to you. And your motion.
I'll make a motion to adjourn.
Mr. Wells, have a second, please.
I'll second.
Thank you, Ms. Musto. Roll call vote. Mr. Zulus,
Yes.
Mr. Wells,
Yes.
Ms. Bradley,
Yes.
Ms. Musto,
Yes.
and Mr. Doyle. Yes. Thank you all. Have a good evening.
Thank you. Good night.